Back in 2014, a small, unproven studio created a Kickstarter campaign for their first game. It was pitched as a realistic single-player RPG, set in medieval Europe with an open-world sandbox and period-accurate melee combat. It also promised to have no dragons. We all know that you can't have a medieval open-world RPG without dragons, so needless to say, this was a bold step for the fledgling Warhorse Studios. Impressed with their audacity, backers wound up pledging over £1.1 million to help bring the project to life, causing the project to fall within the top 15 most funded video game Kickstarters of all time in 2014. But before that, Come Deliverance had been struggling to even get to this stage for 5 long years. Lead writer for the Mafia and Mafia 2 games, Daniel Vavra, had left his job at 2K Czech in 2009 before Mafia 2 had even released, prompting his higher-ups to make changes to Mafia 2's script for reasons unknown. From here, Vavra began trying his best to pitch the premise of Come Deliverance to investors that he had connections with. After quite a few failed pitches, Vavra's team was close to giving up before they finally nailed their pitch with Czech billionaire Zdeněk Bakala. With their initial funding secured, Warhorse Studios finally formed in July of 2011 before beginning their work on their prototype. Now we fast forward back to 2014. Even after the Kickstarter campaign's success, Warhorse needed more money to continue to create a historically accurate and realistic depiction of 15th century Bohemia. The team was hitting their backer alpha and beta tests on time, but not the promised release window of Q4 2015. As seems to be the tradition with Kickstarter projects, the full release of Come Deliverance finally happened in February of 2018 after picking up publisher Deep Silver to help things along. The estimated total that the game cost to create and market was $36.5 million, a far cry from the initial Kickstarter goal, even if the Kickstarter was more to prove that people were interested in the game. But let's move away from all of the numbers and development time. What was this game promised to be? What made it so appealing that an unproven studio was able to raise this much capital and interest from outside sources? Well, a lot of things really. From the get-go, Warhorse promised a highly immersive and realistic medieval sandbox, one without magic and demons and dragons and all of the tired fantasy tropes. One that relied on a one-of-a-kind combat system that felt authentic to real combat rather than just pointing and clicking. You could create your own weapons, food, potions, and other crafting staples by participating in an interactive minigame. You could approach any quest the way that you wanted, build your character to suit a more roguish, bardic, or warrior playstyle, and earn the respect or ire of various townspeople across the land. You had to eat, sleep, and manage your inventory. Warhorse truly set out to build on a genre that surprisingly hadn't been fleshed out to the degree that they wanted. And you know what game I personally saw Come Deliverance compared to the most? Oblivion. Which, yeah, is pretty funny at first glance. But after playing the game for myself for the first time in December of 2019, I understood why that initial connection was made. While standards were much different for games in 2006, that initial surge of euphoria stemming from immersive landscapes, boundless exploration, and tailoring my character to suit my tastes were all rediscovered in Kingdom Come. I understand just how different these two titles are at their core, but the sensation derived from my adventuring throughout Bohemia did bring back a feeling that had been lost on me with newer RPGs for quite some time. So in this video, I'm going to be taking a look at Come Deliverance, and talking about what it got right and where it could have been improved. As a disclaimer, this game is massive, and discussing every chunk of playable content and all of their possibilities is gonna be pretty difficult for me to do, especially while getting this video out in a timely manner. So there will be parts that I miss. But I do plan on at least covering the majority of the game's systems, storylines, and mechanics to the best of my ability while still getting this thing out in January. Before I begin, I'll note that I have a sponsor with War Thunder that will show up right around the halfway mark, so try not to be too alarmed. Kingdom Come's story kicks off with a mural of events revolving around King Charles IV of Bohemia. He was generally regarded as a great king who wound up being succeeded by a shithead son by the name of Wenceslas IV, which is a name I'm sure I'm going to be able to say perfectly every time. After the nobles got sick of Wenceslas, they decided to inform his half-brother, who then kidnapped the king and began marching on Bohemia. So let's get this out of the way now. This game is heavily entrenched in historical events that I've never studied casually or in any class throughout my life. I can't tell you about the Revolutionary War or the Louisiana Purchase, but anything across the ocean from America is just a forbidden topic in American public schools. So I'm not really going to be able to give you any sort of insight on these 14th to 15th century events, and we'll try to focus instead on the game's writing and portrayal of characters. I have seen a few articles claiming that much of Kingdom Come's story paints these events in a more Czech-centric light, while also portraying certain factions and people with a more barbaric and bloodthirsty tone. I've got no idea how true that is, but it also kind of makes sense if it is true. A lot of countries tend to produce games that paint their locality a bit more positively, so that's really not a big issue for me. After a fly-in of the game's beautiful landscapes, we get introduced to our fully voiced character, Henry. Henry is, I'm trying to put this the best way that I can, but Henry is a talentless pile of shit in a town full of peasants who toil away all day in the fields, the mines, and so on. He's the embodiment of a level 1 NPC with zero capabilities. He isn't the chosen one or a diamond in the rough. He's a peasant in every sense of the word. He can't read or write. He can barely hold a sword. He spends his days getting drunk and goofing off with his friends. And this is a pretty interesting start. If I were to run off and try to fight a common bandit, I would probably get my ass kicked. You have to work hard to become even decent at fighting, archery, stealth, and so on. For the first 10 to 20 hours of the game, you're probably not going to be amazing at anything. Given some time, you'll pick up a skill that you're really good at and a couple that you dabble in. And it isn't until the later stages of the game that you really start to become decent at everything. And that's only if you really choose to focus on being a jack of all trades. When I first played, I was a little into speech and stealing and heavy into melee combat. Even by the end, I couldn't pass a lot of speech checks and would frequently get caught by people when in stealth. This time around, I went with a much more balanced approach. I focused much more on speech, stealth, medicine, and reading, but I never felt like I got quite to the stage that I got to when I was clobbering people with a mace. When you start building your version of Henry, you're going to want to stick to that vision until you can take care of yourself instead of trying to pick up a bit of everything at once. I mean, sure, you can dabble in stuff, of course, but the time that it takes to master something might surprise you, and I wound up shoring up any weak spots near the end of my run, not the beginning. Since we're here, we might as well talk about the intricacies of leveling in Kingdom Come. So you've got your main level, your stats, and your individual skill levels. Your main level comes naturally from leveling everything else and doing quests. Every few levels you'll gain a perk. These perks will occasionally clash with each other, making it so that you can only choose one or the other. For example, you can only choose the Infamous or the Local Hero perk. With the former, you gain +1 to a chunk of stats at a low reputation, and with the latter, you gain +1 at a high reputation. But there's usually a trade-off in these perks as well. With Infamous, you'll naturally accrue more reputation easily, making it harder to maintain that low rep if you wind up acting heroically. And with Local Hero, you'll take harsher penalties and jail time for more innocuous crimes. And this kind of trade-off extends to perks like Ascetic, where you don't get hungry as quickly, but when you do get hungry, the effects of your hunger are 20% worse. A lot of the main stat perks are fun in this way and lend a bit more intrigue than your average flat point increase perks. Your primary stats are about what you'd expect, and encompass strength, agility, vitality, and speech. There are also some supplementary stats that don't have any perks in the likes of charisma, visibility, conspicuousness, noise, and speed. Combat skills have their own tab and allow you to choose what kind of weapon you'll be messing with throughout the game. You've got axes, bows, maces, swords, and unarmed. Though the game is definitely heavily stilted towards swords in terms of what kind of perks you can choose from. That said, there is a distinction between short sword and long sword skills, but the amount of each of them still outdoes all of the other weapons here. Each of the skills involved here teach you a new combo chain, which I actually didn't really use as much when I was using a sword this time around. I use the mace ones pretty frequently, but I guess I just never really got into the sword combos. But either way, I actually find bows in particular to be pretty interesting. Nearly anyone can pick up a sword or mace and swing it around even if they can't do it particularly well. But the bow is a different beast, and as such you're going to actively hurt your forearm with the string until level 5 unless you wear an arm guard, which leans into that realism aspect that the devs wanted to go for here. Hell, you can't even hold the bow correctly until level 5 either, making the skill much more of an investment when compared to the melee weapons. The final bits of the combat tab involve defense and warfare, both of which bring perks to the table that will further enhance how good you are at fighting. You'll naturally level these just through combat, so they aren't anything that you can focus on to an extraordinary degree. The final tab involving your leveling endeavors is the big one. There are all of these extra skills that you'd expect, along with some interesting ones that snuck into the mix. Alchemy, drinking, herbalism, horsemanship, houndmaster, hunting, lockpicking, maintenance, pickpocketing, reading, and stealth all make their way into the fray. They all do exactly what you'd expect them to do from the name alone. And I won't bother sitting here and going over every single perk that they carry with them. Though I will say that you can't do anything with Houndmaster until you play through part of one of the DLCs, so I won't even touch that one. To give you an idea of the type of cool things that you can expect from focusing on the rest of the skills though, I will hit you with some of my favorite ideas that were thought up here. Dog Person makes it so that other people's dogs won't attack or bark at you when you're snooping around their homes, unless of course you step on them, threaten, or attack them. Magistrate allows you to take your reading skill and utilize it so that you have an easier time persuading guards. You can have less issues pickpocketing people who have the same level of charisma that you do with the Comrade perk, which comes into play when approaching people who are generally wearing the same clothing that you are. And appropriately, the Witcher perk allows you to drink more potions, which do affect how full you are alongside your food and drink consumption. It's an overall very fun and immersive style of skill system that I don't recall seeing to this degree in more modern games, and it reminds me heavily of older role-playing systems. Of course, all of these skills affect and are derived from many of this game's more unique mechanics. The aforementioned hunger and eating systems are super important to maintain Henry's fortitude, as overeating will result in a decrease in stamina, and going hungry will result in the same thing but with the addition of a slow health drain. Many of the previous perks affect this system, with one of them even rewarding the player for maintaining a solid diet without overeating or going hungry. Then we have the stealth system, which is affected by a few of those supplementary skills from before, namely visibility, noise, and conspicuousness. Visibility is exactly what it sounds like, and is a number that you generally want to lower instead of raise if you're trying to blend in and not draw attention to yourself. As such, your outfit choice matters, light reveals you and shadow hides you. Noise is also pretty straightforward. Your heavier armors make more noise, your softer cloths make less, and the type of weapons that you carry also affect this stat. And finally, to tie this whole system together, you have your conspicuousness. This asks the age-old question of, will it blend? Are you wearing pristine knightly armor in the middle of a town of roguish peasants? Or are you sticking to a more ragged look and keeping yourself unwashed? All of this translates to a much more in-depth stealth and charisma system that goes beyond the press the crouch button to crouch and press the speech option to talk good. Guards are going to hold a grudge against you if you've been stealing and getting caught. They're going to look at you with suspicion if you approach them looking like you crawled out of a sewer with frayed and dirty clothing. And they're generally going to look the other way more if you've cleaned yourself, if you maintain your clothing, and if it shimmers with the gleam of nobility. Now, this isn't always the case, as I think it's all kind of a percentage-based system with stuff like random stolen goods checks and the like, but for the most part you want to look the part to have the most luck with your thief endeavors. Bright-ass armor is going to stick out even at night, and the clanging of your heavy weapons will tip people off, and you'll generally just be caught unless you're really lucky. Even when you're crawling around in your brightest armor though, there are perks which will help you out, like the one that reduces the sound of your footsteps in rain. It's a very lush economy of playing your way and penalizing you for trying to do it all if you don't take the time to properly prepare. This game is a cavalcade of moving parts and integrated systems, and I don't think that this is the right time to cover every possibility all at once. The main story and the side quests guide you through a lot of the more fringe systems as well as the in-your-face ones, and I think it'll be best to cover them as they come up from here on out. So after getting awakened by Henry's mother, our goals start out pretty simply. Shake down the town drunk who owes Henry's dad some cash, use that cash to buy charcoal for the forge, pick up a crossguard for the sword that his dad's been assembling, grab a pitcher of beer, and attend sword training lessons. I could start anywhere here. I picked flowers instead. Yeah, herbalism is real good for alchemy later down the line, and has some great extra perks that can increase your charisma, horse handling, vitality, herb sale price, and allow you to gain strength while gathering. The downside to all of this is, well, yeah, the realism of this game can be a blessing and a curse, but I really have a problem with the third-person camera flyout. I would much rather do this in first person, but for some reason the devs thought that this was the way to go. My honest guess with the way that the camera cuts off at Henry's hands is that what's really happening is that the herb is disappearing and they didn't want to show or animate it actually being put into the pouch. But my biggest issue with herb gathering itself is the actual process of clicking on the herbs. I know that sounds weird, but basically first you have to know what the herbs look like. Okay, no problem. I know what the valerian, chamomile, nettle, and so on look like and can spot them if I'm keeping an eye out with no issue. But the hitboxes are absolutely all over the place. You can't simply stop and pluck anything in this game. Most of the time you have to spot your herb, slow down, and guess at where the hitbox is. And it can be right on the flower, but it can also be above it, or under it, or anywhere around it. It's absurd and makes this task that much more frustrating beyond the mini cutscenes that play out every time. Regardless, after picking and plucking, it's time to get to the real meat of the tutorial village. Sword training introduces the combat basics of the game, at least in terms of attacking with a melee weapon. This is where that quote-unquote realistic combat comes into play, which actually killed the game for a lot of people from what I've heard. I actually didn't mind it as much, it's just very different is all. Basically, you have 6 points to swing at in the shape of a 5-sided star with a center dot. To best catch your opponent off guard, you want to constantly swing at different points on their body, which is how many of the combos are structured later on. Right click is your stabbing, left click is your chopping. When your hit lands, you can immediately swipe again to chain your attacks. The whole thing comes together to create a rhythmic beat of slicing and dicing, though your stamina is going to limit how long you can keep that up. When you go to collect money from the town drunk, the system opens up a little bit more with unarmed combat instead of swords. Here you can kick and block, which are used to break your opponent's guard while putting up your own. The first time that I played, I got my ass kicked by old Kunesh here. But my experience came into play this time around, and I was able to stick my fist down his throat, prompting him to give up his hammer and nails. Before this scuffle even plays out though, I got a taste of the speech system, which is a beast of its own. Everything that you can think of that might affect the outcome here comes into play. Who you're talking to, which faction they're a part of, what they're wearing, what you're wearing, whether you're dirty or clean, who you're representing, and so on. You also get a chance to persuade based off of your own skills, social status, and demeanor. So for example, if your social status is high and your clothing is clean and high quality, you'll probably have an easy time with a noble. Whereas a thuggish brute like Kunesh here is probably not going to care about that. As such, social standing isn't even an option with him. Opting for a threat instead was what I chose since my number was higher there, but it wasn't high enough to avoid the conflict. Later on, you can become an empath and see what your opponent's numbers are, making this whole process easier even down to the amount of coin that you need to give them to bribe them. It's probably one of my favorite speech systems I've seen out of a game, and it really makes charisma play a role that so many games fail to get right. Further down the road, we can hit up some merchants which have their own little haggling system in place. While this isn't anything revolutionary, it's a welcome addition to the game when you're tight on money. Basically, you throw a number out there and if they aren't insulted by it, the merchant will hit you with a counter. This fills a little meter slowly or quickly depending on your offering and your speech skills, which gives you another couple of chances to eventually meet them at a price that they're willing to accept. After this, you can save your game. Oh yeah, that was another thing that chapped a lot of people's asses. So your game does autosave at certain events or after you sleep, but you can't manually save unless you use something called Savior Schnapps. You get 5 of these for free by paying your girlfriend a visit at the bar, but the whole thing is more of a statement from Warhorse about the idea of quick saving or reloading when something goes wrong. They wanted consequences to be meted out to the player for their actions, and if you really hated how something went, well then you better reload and play it all over, I guess. It's an odd idea just because I respect it, and I'm kind of irritated by it at the same time. On one hand, I like the idea of your game and playthrough just having these consequences when you steal and get caught or play a quest and muck it up somehow. On the other hand, I wish this was just an option that you could toggle in the game. A kind of, hey, we recommend that you play with limited saves, it's kind of how we designed the game. But if you really don't want that, you can play on baby mode for little toddlers who hate bad things happening to them. Or whatever. I don't know, I just like the idea of the option being there, regardless of the developer's preferences. The only other thing that I'll touch on before finishing up Skeleton is the fact that for as nice as this game looks at times, it can look equally as bad when things bug out, lag, or just break in general. Interior lighting in particular tends to have these issues, making the game feel like it's still in beta. and these issues were 10 times worse when the game initially released. NPCs do tend to react to Henry depending on if they know of him or if they notice he's injured or dirty or the like, but will still glitch out occasionally as you're walking around. It definitely smacks of a AA developed game, which is pretty accurate to its budget before marketing. And it's likely another reason why the game was so heavily compared to Oblivion, as many of those behavioral issues are shared in a way with Kingdom Come. Again, it's not something that I personally mind as much, but no one should expect to go into this game without it janking out at some point or another. So this whole thing wraps up with Henry helping his dad out at the Forge, who's been assigned with creating a magnificent sword for the Lord of Skalitz. This entire scene sets the mood for a lot of what this game is going to be about. It's pretty lengthy, but I do admire it a lot. There's a chat between Henry and his dad, with the topic of Wenceslas as a ruler being one of the key points. Henry's dad praises Charles IV as a once-in-a-millennium ruler, who built half of Prague and a score of other important advancements without ever going to war. He's sympathetic towards Wenceslas, who he claims never had a chance at being as great as his father, and he spurns the king's brother Sigismund, who he dislikes for being as aggressive as he has. Throughout this conversation, the sword is put together by the duo, which you can tell the devs really respected the process of. I don't blame them, blacksmithing is a fascinating profession. I think the most telling thing about this whole scene though is the fact that even though the two are chattering on about politics, neither of them can read the crossguard of the sword, which was inscribed in another city. To be fair, the thing was inscribed in Latin, which I sure as hell can't read, but Henry's dad isn't even entirely sure if it is Latin, which really continues to set up this world where everyone has an opinion, but few can even read or have had experiences outside of their professional lives. And now we get to the climax of the first tutorial village. Nearly everything that I've said up until this point should probably be taken as a relatively spoiler-free summary. If you haven't played the game and are interested at this stage, I'd recommend giving it a whirl for yourself. But this is where the story is gonna really start unfolding. So the Lord of Skalitz, Sir Radzig, pops by to admire Henry's dad's handiwork, which is noted several times as much better than what you'd expect from some random countryside swordsmith. Alongside Radzig is another foreign noble, who will have much more of an impact later. It's clear that Radzig and Henry's dad share a history, though that's not expanded on for quite a while, seeing as an army of Cumans show up and pillage Skalitz. This scene is really well done, and has Henry running back to the keep before deciding to bravely run back to help his mom and dad. Henry's dad clearly has fighting capabilities beyond his worn-down exterior, as he takes down a handful of Cumans before falling to this bald fuck on a horse. Henry watches in horror as the army strikes down his mom soon after, and the shock eventually jolts him into running away to inform the next garrison over as to what's transpired here. This is a really great transition from the idyllic and lazy life that Henry has led, which has now been plunged into the horrors of war and misery. I really like the sudden cut from, oh, I'm picking flowers and beating up drunks and clowning around with the lads, to nearly everything and everyone that I loved is dead and I don't know what to do with myself now. This escape sequence leads into your horsemanship tutorial, which comes with a lot of your standard riding mechanics. You can whistle for your horse, which also serves as a way to call attention to yourself to others. You can canter, which will allow for a horse to follow a road without your input so that you can look around. And you can sprint, which drains the horse's stamina bar. If it becomes fully depleted, the horse may try to throw you off of it, so managing the stamina bar is important for sequences like these. It's a fine set of mechanics, though I will say that later there are moments where your horse will run into something seemingly innocuous like a bush and it'll just fling you off or bring you to a full stop. Which I guess kinda leads more to a realism kind of thing. I mean, I guess because of nearly every other game, bushes are kind of these things that you could just walk through. But in real life, a bush is a bush. You can't just walk through it. At least not the center of it. This makes wilderness traversal particularly tough, which does make sense for something that flourishes more on a flat landscape or road. I've definitely tried taking some shortcuts in this game that have had me clothesline myself on low-hanging ropes or the like, which does further reinforce that realism-first core of Kingdom Come. After we make our escape to the nearby garrison, Henry gets his injured leg tended to before trying to explain as best that he can what happened in Skalitz. He's unsure of which army attacked, but the Lord here realizes that it may be Sigismund's Cumans, which they have no recourse for at the moment. The army is simply too big for a small garrison and a backwater town to defend against. And again, these cutscenes are lengthy, sometimes stretching on for a good 5 or more minutes, making the whole thing seem a bit more cinematic rather than entirely taking place from Henry's perspective. I personally don't mind it as much, but I've also had plenty of experience playing through Kojima's exposition-laden games. Now that said, this kind of thing was known to drive a lot of people away from Kingdom Come. This entire string of cutscenes with small chunks of gameplay interspersed throughout lasts about, I don't know, maybe 30 to 60 minutes depending on which part you count in the string. And while it does impart some important exposition and world building, that's not always what people want in their games in this quantity. Especially when we haven't really even begun to have any sort of free agency beyond these small tasks and scallots. It's a little risky to front-load these scenes when you're trying to keep people hooked. But I also kind of respect the devs for just doing things their way. I guess I just would have been pissed if I came home from work and I had like, a half hour to play video games before bed, and it was just like, okay, I watched a movie. And the thing is, nothing about these scenes can really be counted as filler if you consider how it portrays this whole ordeal. It shapes Henry into more than just some random peasant and lends his character more spine. As such, Henry meets with the Lord of Talmberg's wife, who's exceedingly bored and lonely with her comparatively older husband. Henry's presence gives her something to do and someone to talk to, which leads to a few scenes where she looks after him with a small amount of sexual tension. Now I do really have to get on the devs for something here, because they explicitly stated that there would be no magic in this game. And yet, Henry is able to manipulate his bed to talk directly to the Lord's wife here. I have to say, this act of egregious ventriloquism hasn't gone unnoticed and isn't appreciated in the slightest. And I'm more than a little pissed off by this blatant inclusion of the dark arts.
You poor boy. May the Lord have mercy on their souls.
I ran to the castle like our neighbors to take cover, but I didn't make it.
After this, Radzig pops by to tell the people of Talmberg that he's using the cover of the storm that's currently raging in order to make his escape. And the Cumans led by Sir Markarth approach soon after in the morning. After some tense exchange, Markarth decides to believe that Radzig isn't being harbored here, and the army marches off. This is the last time you'll see Markarth in the entire game. I'm not kidding about that. I don't know why I told you his name. I guess because he's probably going to be a big point in the next game if that's being made, which I believe it is, but it seemed like he was going to be so much more important, and I know I'm jumping ahead of myself here, but he just doesn't appear for the rest of the game. It's not even remotely about him. He takes this big-ass army that ruins Henry's life and just marches away, and that's it. I don't know, it's just very interesting because they put a lot of this stuff in the beginning, and there's no payoff, at least in this game. There are a lot of moving parts here, and much of the storytelling during these scenes reminds me of one of my favorite films of all time, Braveheart. But for those who kind of just blank out when there's a lot of names, places, and ideas being thrown out all at once, this whole thing might not be as fun to watch. And I could totally see someone just outright not enjoying this the way that I do. Regardless, we are now finally free to move around again, as Henry's immediate goal is to suit up, grab a horse, and head back to Skalitz to bury his mom and dad. Of course, the Knight Commander of the keep here won't just let you go, seeing as Radzig expressly denied him from doing so. This is where the game gives you a chance to try out sneaking and stealing, which I actually like quite a lot. Rather than relying on a stealth marker, you have to kind of just go when you think it's best to go, and listening for reactions is the best way to tell if you're about to get caught. Lockpicking, on the other hand, is a whole other beast, which many complained about when Kingdom Come came out. And again, as with many of the systems in the game, it's something that I personally enjoy even if I see it irritating others. But basically you have this wheel, and right in the middle of the ridged tracks is a circle. What you want to do is try to keep the circle in the sweet spot as it jitters around when you rotate the outer wheel around it. If you let the circle stray too much, it'll not only cause more noise when you pick the lock, it also has a chance of resetting the lock or breaking your pick. I do have to imagine that this minigame is a nightmare on a controller just due to the lack of finesse that you can get with the mouse. But as things stand, I prefer this game over your standard Bethesda picking. On the topic of stolen items, the game encourages you to try to resell them as far as you can away from the scene of the crime as possible, so that the trader that you're dumping them off to doesn't suspect any wrongdoing. Of course, there are fences that exist who don't give a shit, so that's always an option. It's a pretty well-rounded set of roguish mechanics, and it actually encourages me to play a certain way throughout Kingdom Come's entirety that I tend to forget about by mid-game in other games. So after stealing a set of armor, it's important to note just how many slots there are when you equip your gear. You have your head slots, which allow for a helmet, a coif, is it coif or coif? You know, now that I'm looking at it, it looks kind of French.
Quaff.
Quaff. Coif.
Chainmail and a neck chain. You've got your body armor, which allows for more chainmail, a shirt, gloves, arm gear, a body plate, and any outer garments. You've got legs, which allow for yet more chainmail, pants, boots, and leg plating. And you've got your hands, which allow for your standard main and offhand weapons, a bow and arrows, a ring, and spurs. And chainmail. That's a whopping 20 equipment slots that make customization a really fun facet of this game. I really like this entire system a lot, and it encourages some pretty constant swapping as time goes on. That said, everything has a weight to it. And weight is... Alright, so I abhor weight systems in pretty much every game. Oftentimes it feels like a developer goes, wait, if a player can carry everything that they want at all times, that's unrealistic. They say as literal fireballs zing past their players' heads while they tote around 100 wheels of cheese, a phylactery of potions, an arsenal of weapons, and a cubic foot of uranium. There's just a point in a lot of games where a weight system feels arbitrary given the content of the game and how unrealistic nearly every other piece of it is. But Kingdom Come has probably one of the better excuses for a weight system to exist as it does. And you know what? It still sucks to deal with. I'm nearly always pushing my weight limit when I have a perk that gives me charisma when I tote around 30 flowers at all times. So trying to have any secondary set of gear on me is nearly impossible without compromising other things that I want, like food. Again, I understand the weight system's inclusion, but I've always been a bigger fan of you can carry 5 heavy items, 10 medium items, and 15 light items at once, rather than having every herb weigh something. Games with backpacks, pouches, and the like tend to have me tolerating their systems more than, this butcher knife weighs 5 pounds. What the game doesn't tell you is that a lot of your weight can be mitigated through your horse once you get it, though that isn't going to be for a bit. But you can store quite a lot of weight on it even if it is the starter horse. Of course, there are several perks that make you able to carry more and a couple that make certain things lighter. And while it does feel so relieving to finally be able to carry that much more, it makes these perks nearly mandatory to varying degrees, which makes them feel less like perks and more like requirements. Either way, when you're done sweeping the area, you can head over to the guard who's watching the main gate. If you persuaded him earlier, he'll let you through on the premise that he wouldn't get a lot of shit from his superiors if you simply looked like another guard. A different option is talking to the Lord's wife and having her direct you towards grabbing some armor with an excuse that the guard will buy. Or you could always just jump off the drawbridge leading down to the main village if you don't want to go through with all that effort. But regardless of your method, you're now off to Skalitz again to witness its now dilapidated state. I find it funny that you can go through the effort of stealing a horse as the game lists as an optional objective, but you don't keep it with you for the 2-minute ride up the road. I feel like this was a way to introduce the idea of crime, but it also feels kinda stupid when it turns out to be a waste. After fighting off a few common bandits and locating a shovel, Henry gets to digging before a group of thugs led by someone named Runt show up to rob him of the sword that he helped to make. It's worth noting that these thugs were directed towards Henry by the same guy who he took the shovel from, who used to be a citizen of Skalitz also. The whole thing leads to a fight that's unwinnable, which... yeah, on one hand it's never super fun to have a scripted fight with a single outcome, but on the other, this is literally the end of the prologue and it's meant to set up a big plot point later on. It's also meant to convey that no matter how decent you are at swordplay as a player, you're always going to be playing as an untrained peasant against a thug who's been doing this for all of his life. It's an okay trade-off, I guess. I just wish it were possible for Henry to at least get one good blow in and have it alter the final cutscene while still having the same ultimate result. Regardless, the intro of the game now plays if you can believe that shit. Like, if I didn't take the time to pick flowers and all of that, I'd have spent at least 3 hours getting to this stage. And this was a huge sticking point for detractors of the game. If you're not immediately invested into the world of Kingdom Come and the plight of Henry along with the emotions that he feels and the person that he is, then this is going to kill any momentum for you. If you want to just get in and start killing and stealing and running off to a corner of the map, this introduction is going to drag on and on. I mean, I'm about 35 minutes or so into this video now, and we're just now getting to the meat of the game. I'd completely understand if this were a deal breaker for someone. Either way, Henry gets rescued by the miller's niece, who brought reinforcements in from Talmberg. This ultimately spares his life, though Henry does still lose the sword. After several delirious PTSD dream-saturated weeks, Henry finally feels well enough to move again. And now you can run anywhere that you want to. Obviously the game still has objectives for you, but you can run around and pick up whatever extra questing that you want to if you so choose. As such, the game hits you with a relatively interesting side quest immediately. So this is the Miller. I mean, he's technically just a single miller of many millers, but I always just called him the Miller. The thing to know about millers in this game is that while their outward profession is milling, what they really are a group of thieves who work together to plan out heists and the like. I don't know if there's any actual historical significance there, but it is cool regardless. The game does have a passage about it in its codex, although I'm not sure how true it might be. Actually, if anyone has any historical facts that I missed that tie into this game and want to drop them in the comments, I love reading that shit. You can choose to pay the Miller here back for taking care of you and getting you medicine and all that for 2 weeks if you do a job for him. You can also pay him back directly, but not only will that cost you 50 groschen, you also lose reputation for initially refusing his quest. The quest itself involves digging up a dead body and plucking a ring from its finger.
You want me to dig up a corpse, take a ring from it and give it to your friend in Kohelnitz? Is nothing sacred to you?
Money first, morals later.
Of course, the ring isn't on the body, and the whole thing has you breaking into the executioner's house and stealing the ring from his belongings, which is all a test that leads into more thieves' quests down the line. The various millers across the land are going to be your fences for this game, which is also a pretty fun flavor in its own right. If you want to, you can train up your lockpicking and pickpocketing with the miller as your teacher. I've never been a big pickpocketing guy in games, but Kingdom Come at least shakes up the usual mechanics. First, you have to get behind your target and rummage. The rummaging can go on for as long as you like, but too long and you'll get caught. You want to try to go as long as possible because that translates directly to more stealing time. So if you rummage for 10 seconds, then you have 10 seconds to steal. This process involves you navigating a circle to each item, unveiling it, and then deciding whether or not you want to steal it. Every time you do steal an item, a certain amount of time depending on the item's size and weight gets deducted from your initial 10 seconds. So if you spend 2 seconds getting to the item, and it costs 3 seconds of time when you go to steal it, you'll have 5 seconds to get out of the menu with your item in tow. It is pretty cool, though again, still not my jam, all things concerned. Since we're here, we might as well touch on the game's movement and fast travel systems. One of the biggest differences in terms of movement mechanics that varies from the likes of Oblivion is how easy it is to hurt yourself when trying to jump and climb from parts of the environment. You're not going to be able to climb sheer cliff faces in Kingdom Come, even with a horse. You can't simply bounce from point to point with minimal damage. Hell, you can't even swim. Traversing the landscape basically involves you asking yourself, could the average person climb that barehanded? And this line of thinking extends to your horse as well. You can't mash the jump button to get up a mountain. You'll want to stick to the roads. Even fast traveling involves potential random encounters which could wind up in your death if you're not ready. It's a punishing system that again, as always, puts realism first. While I do tend to get annoyed with it at times, minimizing risk by traveling during daylight or just sticking to the roads in general is usually the answer. Either way, let's stick to the main quest and we'll circle back to the side quest stuff later. There will be a point where I have easier access to a horse before I run through a lot of the notable side quests. For now though, I get my gear in order before heading to the nearby town of Rattay. This is easily the biggest civilized area in this game yet, and has plenty of stuff to do. As far as the main stuff goes though, we meet up with Radzig, who Henry apologized profusely to before begging him for training. Radzig accepts and makes him a member of the town guard, which has us reporting into the Knight Commander of Lord Hanush of Rattay. The training here has us learning more advanced techniques, including perfect blocking, riposting, and feints. It's all stuff that I know how to do now, but I had a hard time with initially. This game's combat takes quite a bit of practice, and even though I've got a bit of muscle memory for it now, it's important to note that much of this made me feel very much like a shit-laden peasant when I initially played this game. Archery practice follows this, which is a whole other beast. This game probably has the toughest form of archery that I've ever seen, as there's no crosshair and the arrow drop is very real. Well, depending on which arrows you use. And bow. In the earlier levels, you're constantly fighting against the drawstrings tension, and it makes the whole thing a lot more difficult than you'd expect it to be. but I gotta say it feels really rewarding later on to peg someone in the shoulder with a well-placed shot, so I'm all for this difficulty curve. The quest itself has your instructor telling you how much you suck, before a relative of Lord Hanush, Hans, strolls up to mock you for being a peasant, as he pretty much has done at every turn so far. An archery contest ensues, which I'm sure that you can lose, but I never did. When you beat Hans, he challenges you to a sword fight, which is the much easier test. Your reward for beating him is his bow, which is a very welcome pickup at this stage, but I can't really use it until I hit level 10 archery. Rattay itself is a hub of traders, craftsmen, noblemen, and beggars. The beggars naturally have poured in from Skalitz, which has disrupted the place's usual economy. You'll see a few familiar faces if you look around, and they usually have some side quests for you to take on. But the real fun stuff comes from shopping around and learning new things. Visiting the cobbler for new boots, the tailor for a cheap tunic, the weaponsmith so that you can weep at the prices and clutch your plank of wood dearly. It's a solid medium-sized town, and it feels like a step up from everything else that we've seen so far. Next up, we'll walk through the basics of guard duty. This is boring as hell because it has us walking at a snail's pace around town following this guy who describes all the places that you've already checked out more or less. I mean, it's okay I guess, it's just not super riveting stuff.
Where's Moimir anyway? Isn't he supposed to be here with you? Come on, Henry. Let's go and find that idler, and you'd better talk some sense into him. What the fuck are you doing here when you're supposed to be on the gate?
When do you,
Move your carcass and go and guard the gate.
When do you want me to,
Not a word. Get moving. You're lucky it was me found out, not the bailiff, or God forbid, Captain Bernard. Out!
Yeah, get out of here, you piece of shit.
Come and sit with me, Henry. Let's have a drink.
These guys definitely have their shit together, I'll tell you what. So we play a game of dice, which introduces the game's gambling system. It's not a bad game, pretty simple all things considered, but I won't even go into the rules since it's just a dice poker kind of thing. Eventually the sun goes down and Henry is told to close everything up for curfew. He's also told that it's illegal to walk around Rattay at night without a torch, but half the people around here don't do that shit. When all is said and done, the last person refusing to let a tavern close is none other than Hans, who gets in Henry's face, leading into another fistfight. Eventually, Hanush comes down to break up the two before reprimanding both and demanding that Hans take Henry with him hunting tomorrow. At this point, Hans is a complete douchebag towards anyone deemed a peasant, and Henry's just trying his best to follow orders and make his way up in the world. This all changes with the hunting mission, which starts off with the same treatment as usual. Hans is in good spirits, though still a complete dick towards Henry because that's just how nobles thought of their subjects back in the day. Henry kinda puts up with it before a competition to hunt rabbits ensues. This really showcases the ins and outs of hunting, which has a lot of good parts and quite a few bad parts to it. First off, you're gonna need to learn how to shoot, and practice will really start to teach you which arrows are going to drop off sooner and where you're going to want to be aiming your camera. It's not something that you can really explain, it's just something that you get the feel for. By the time I was done with the hunt, I was easily able to hit the rabbits with minimal missing. The immersion here is really damn good. I felt content to just stalk animals, down them, loot their meat, and head back to camp when my inventory got full. Now the bad side is... well, the animal AI is laughably bad. Like I can just full on walk up to rabbits and deer and just blast them. The deers take more arrows to take down, which is funny because they just don't react to getting shot in the side. Like that seems like a pretty basic thing to have in your hunting. Additionally, animals will just spawn in front of you sometimes, which really pulls away from the immersion that the game just built. I like the perks of being able to take trophies, skin and butcher your catches, and so on, but after a bit the hunt itself becomes relatively boring when bow usage becomes easier and easier. Either way, after the contest ends, Hans gets it in his head that he's going to hunt a boar now. With arrows, of course. Even Henry's like, maybe a spear? After the thing bolts, Hans takes off after it before getting strung up by some humans who were just hanging around the area apparently. After taking them out, Henry unties Hans and well, let's just say that life-saving gratitude is a hell of a way to get treated differently. Yeah, the two are pretty much friends now, and Henry gets Hans back to Rattay before getting rewarded and being inducted into Radzig's personal guard. As the minor celebration gets underway, distressing news comes in from the Knight Commander, who claims that more bandits have attacked the nearby village of Neuhof. In a fit of rage, Hanush demands that a troop march to take care of the rabble. The interesting part is that the description of the bandit leader fits Runt from earlier, and Henry's ready to attempt to reclaim his honor and Radzig's sword. He is given a horse at this stage, which is where I wanted to break and talk about the side stuff. But this quest is pretty pressing, so let's take care of the next quest or two first. So Neuhoff is indeed fucked. But there is more to it than that, seeing as the bandits seem to have only raised and killed whatever and whoever they could. Now there's a couple of different ways that you can go about this whole thing. For one, you can just charge into the woods on the bandits' trail, which leads to you finding some evidence of one of the village's people fighting back. But if you take your time and question everyone, the bigger picture does come into play. Witnesses note that the bandits fought with each other before fleeing. They also state that there never seemed to be any interest in loot. One of the villagers named Ginger seems particularly cold and lies like a LA Noire character. Eventually, Ginger flees, which launches us into the next quest, which is one that I don't really like very much. Basically, the game directs you towards a particular charcoal burner camp, seeing as Ginger was known to hang out with them. When you get there, the camp tells you that they don't know who Ginger is, and that you should check with another camp which is way up north. So you head up there and follow the river. If you hit the wrong camp, they'll direct you towards the right one. When you get to that camp, they won't talk to you unless you kill the nearby bandits. So you backtrack to the bandits and take them out before they tell you that Ginger is straight up the road. Now this is the worst way to do this quest in my opinion. I only did it this way because I wanted to show the tedium involved with how the game directs you. The smarter way to do it is to question just Ginger, figure out that he has something to do with the bandits, and then pursue him straight to the correct camp. If you have a high enough speech, you can lie to the charcoal burners and tell them that you already killed the bandits. If you don't have a high enough speech, you can just follow one of them and he'll lead you to where Ginger is. Or I guess you could just go to where he is right away. I do like that there are different options here, but the primary one that the game leads you down is very back and forth and kind of annoying to deal with. Regardless, Ginger explains that he recognized one of the bandits with a limp, who resides in the city of Uzhitz. Because of this recognition, Ginger fled because he was afraid that they would kill him. He also notes that there were two gangs, one that was after loot and the other that was after fear. Radzig later elaborates that some bandits opt for fear so that they can start rolling into other towns and get minimal resistance when they do want to take loot. But I think the most fun bit of storytelling here is just how much Henry has already grown as a person. He spent countless nights paralyzed by dreams of the attack on Skalitz. He struggled with the idea that he did nothing to help, and the guilt that he's felt when trying to cope with his own survival. And now he sees himself in Ginger. And instead of reprimanding the guy, he sympathizes with him and explains that there was nothing that he could do in this horrible situation where everyone was dying around him as the bandits attacked the village. It's a good spurt of growth from Henry, and I appreciated the interaction a lot. Alright, so now that we know where our bandit is, let's talk side quests. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I'm not going to hit all of them, but I will be hitting a smattering of them and give you a taste as to what to expect here. Of course, there are the not so great ones that basically have you going to retrieve something like some random treasure for your drunken old neighbor, or hunting and bringing back rabbit meat from the woods. At least with that one, if you're motivated to hunt already, this will help you to get out there with an extra reward. You've also got one where you can just fist fight people. That's it. You beat them for a few coins and then you can continue to do that to the same guy if you want. Then you've got this godforsaken quest, which I'm not doing again, in which you help out a guy who has lost some very particular birds.
Nightingales have a distinctive song. When you hear it close by, you set a trap on the spot. They kept twittering away the whole time they were here, so I can remember the tunes. I'll sing them to you.
I can't wait.
It went something like this.
But then you've got the quests that deliver a little more in the fun story payoffs. One of the best examples of that is meeting up with your buddy Hans, who wants to go to the bathhouse to relax with the girls there. Meeting him there first has him telling you that he couldn't beat one of the wenches in strip dice. So Henry takes his shot and beats her in 2 rounds. The first round she loses her bonnet. The second I don't think she loses anything. It's odd, and this isn't really a complaint because there are plenty of mods that accomplish this sort of thing, but there are nude scenes in Kingdom Come. And again, I don't really care, but it's weird when everyone winds up with clothing on in the bathhouse. Regardless, Henry joins Hans in the tub. Nothing wrong with that, just 2 bros hanging out in a hot tub, baby. Well, old Hans gets it in his head that he wants some fine wine, and sends Henry out to break into and rob the wine cellar in Ratai. You would think this would be an epic stealth mission, but I just walked in and passed the guard, grabbed the wine, and told the guy that Hans sent me. After imbibing the good stuff, Hans continues to flirt with one of the wenches before insisting that Henry bring her a bouquet of flowers. The only place that Henry can think to look for these is in the royal courtyard of the castle, of course. This again is kind of a detour in the fun for no reason. I mean, if I had to break in, sneak past the guards, or just talk my way through like I did with the wine, that would be one thing. But it's just me traveling over to the area, picking the flowers, and watching the ensuing cutscene. I feel like this should have at least been supplemented with Henry drunkenly rambling on about stuff and looking like an idiot to anyone nearby. But whatever. The final scene has the bath wench's husband busting in to reprimand her and attempt to drown Hans. Henry punches his lights out before telling the guy that he just assaulted a lord, which has the guy running out with his tail between his legs. Now from a mechanic's perspective, this quest is very mid, if not on the lower end. But the scenes that accompany it are really fun, and I'd say that it's worth it for those at least.
Drinking will be the death of you.
Damn right. Is there any wine left?
Are you out of your fucking mind?
Where the lower ones are just stuff to do for the sake of stuff to do, the mid-tiers at least have engaging cutscenes to keep the player sated, or some fun mechanics. A good example of the opposite end of the spectrum is participating in the Rhapsody tournament, which is a fighting contest with multiple rounds. If you've gotten on with Hans, you can join this as his page so that he funds the entry fee. The tournament gets really tough, and requires either perfect gameplay at a lower level or just a higher combat level in general. I didn't have that much combat experience when I joined it, and it had me taking out the first opponent with no sweat but getting destroyed by the second guy. It was a genuinely tough challenge, and while I was able to take 1 round of 3 against the second opponent, my skills just weren't high enough with any weapon besides the longsword at this stage. And then I went and got training from the Knight Commander on how to perform unblockable parries, and that just made combat a joke. I mean, yeah, you have to have the fundamentals down, but if you do, this power leap makes combat a cakewalk. It's like the ultimate reward for understanding the combat system, and I had the tournament won in no time once I learned the skill. A good example of a quest that hovers between interesting mechanics and interesting characters is the guy who seems to be slightly out of his mind. He claims that he wanders in from town to sell miracles to those interested. Trinkets, baubles, prayers, whatever. We meet with him in Sasau, where he claims to have seen Henry in a dream.
Where do I know you from?
What?
Of course, my dream.
Shortly after, the guy asks Henry to be his apprentice. And at first it just sounds like he wants Henry to steal shit from people in the name of miracles and all that is holy. But the things that he wants Henry to steal aren't just random beneficial items, they're truly strange. In this case, he wants a man's sore tooth, a decorative branch from the top of the highest church in the kingdom, and a man's lucky cat paw.
Cat's paw? I thought players bring along a rabbit's paw for luck.
We have it all.
I thought so too. But this man is winning one game after another, so cats are clearly even more powerful than rabbits.
Oh.
With the tooth, we have to convince and walk the man over to the blacksmith to get it ripped out.
Ah, look,
Jesus
it's
Christ,
out.
The agony.
They want to keep it as a memento.
I love it.
Oh, all right.
With the branch, we just have to shoot it down, which is no issue. And finally, we can either buy the cat's paw, intimidate the owner into handing it over, or gamble against him for it. After you get all of this random stuff for the con man, he goes, "Hey, could you go steal the burial clothes off a dead person?" "Yeah, sure, why not?" So I get to know about the person who died, I lie to his son, get him to give me some space, yoink the clothes off the body, and strut back to the crazy guy. Like, it's just non-stop lunacy. And it's actually a lot funnier because of how much the game plays by so many rules of the 1400s. Like, a lot of the draw of this game is seeing how certain people lived, how they worked, what kind of social interactions there were, and stuff like that. Then you have this dude who basically has you playing like an Elder Scrolls character and just chaotically grabbing the weirdest damn items. When all is said and done, an angry mob forms outside of his house, seemingly sick of his shit.
Let's teach him a lesson!
He's
Oh,
inside! I saw him go
Fuck.
in!
Henry, delay them.
What?
How? There's a reward for you in the trunk. I'll see you in Ledechko.
On the more interesting from a social aspect side of mid-tier quests, we have one that revolves around the executioner of Ratai and a grieving widow. Basically, the executioner killed the widow's husband after he got caught up in a life of crime, and now the widow has nowhere to go. This really brings to light the treatment of and omen surrounding executioners in this era. There was a lot of superstition about their jobs and what kind of people they had to be, and it caused them to be social outcasts more often than not. People would gossip about them and as such would turn their backs on most people who would associate with them. It's interesting hearing about this phenomenon straight from the horse's mouth. For the executioner, the pay is good and he doesn't personally mind this kind of quiet life, even if people treated him like he had the plague. But for the widow who has no family, she had no one else to turn to. While the executioner has tried his best to look after her, the association with him has only deepened her depression now that everyone is treating her like an outcast too. So Henry sets to work tracking down the woman's dead husband's family. After finding the guy's mom, it's clear that she's not going to be treated right by her. You can push her into going anyway, or talk it over with her and the executioner and push the two together by helping her to realize that she could be happy even as an outcast.
Well, he always treated me nicely. By all that's holy, you're right. I'll stay here. Goodbye.
It's honestly one of the cutest stories in this game, and it helps to show how much socializing meant even in these older days. I like it a lot, but more importantly, I love the quest it leads into, which I'll talk about in a moment. Of course, there are plenty of other mid-tier quests which have Henry running back and forth around the land. Stuff like helping out your friends from Skalitz find a job, or courting the miller's niece, or getting an assortment of wedding arrangements ready for the Lord of Talmberg's wife. That last one has our hero participating in an archery contest to win some fine wine, taming a horse by singing to it, and tracking down a jewel for a crown. All of these little parts are fun in their own right, but not super fulfilling from a narrative angle. I will say that messing up any leg of this stuff without using savior schnapps whenever you get in too far is absolutely grueling. I won the archery contest, hopped on my horse, and began riding off to the next objective, only to get jumped by 5 bandits and a dog and die, meaning that I had to do all of it over again. Stuff like this, while impactful from the gameplay side of things, only dampens my spirits when it comes to trying again. It would be like having to repeat an entire leg of a GTA mission after making it pretty far in, which has only ever been more frustrating to me than rewarding. To each their own, I guess. The rewards for all of these quests are nice little scenes which show the impact of these people on Henry, while strengthening him as a confident guy who can get things done no matter what.
Oh.
And to cap off the mid-tier quests, you can always head back to one of the millers for a proper set of thief quests. The payoff is always money and reputation, but the approach to each mission can be done your way. You've got one where you can pickpocket or knock out a guard for their keys, steal some guard uniforms, and then book it out of there. You've got another where you steal a horse, and another where you steal jewelry from the Lord of Talmberg's wife. And although these are fun to tackle your way, they do tend to highlight a lot of the issues with the thieving system itself. On the lesser end, you'll wind up getting quests that have high requirements out of nowhere, like the third quest to steal the jewelry, which has you needing the ability to unlock the hardest chest type in the game. That's not as big of a deal, all things considered, as there is another miller who you can go to quests for in the meantime. But it really does go from steal a horse to break into a noble's estate, which is pretty fast. The more pressing issues are with the law system, which seems to have no rhyme or reason as to how it operates. Well, I suppose it does, but it doesn't always feel good. For instance, you'll randomly be searched for stolen goods at any given time, whether you've done something or not. And when this happens, you can just drop all of your stolen shit on the ground, surrender, get searched, and then pick it back up. When I stole the horse, I made the mistake of getting off it near a tavern. When I got back on, suddenly everyone knew that it was stolen for some reason. The ideas are there, but the execution is sorely lacking to make this as fulfilling as it can be, even if the actual act of thieving is fun in its own right. Okay, so before we get to the top-end quests, let's head over to our sponsor for this video, War Thunder. So I know what you're thinking. I'm analyzing a medieval game about 15th century Bohemia, so what better sponsor to have than one that involves 20th to 21st century war machines obliterating each other with high-powered weapons. I know, the timing and resemblance is hauntingly impeccable. It's been a decade since War Thunder hit the market, and it's only grown in the amount of vehicles and sheer customization involved in playing how you want to. I mean, I looked through Nexus mods and there is some heinous, degenerate shit in terms of which custom skins you can pick out. Now that said, there are plenty of really cool historically accurate skins that you can pick out as well, which is a fun-ass detail that I didn't expect War Thunder to have. You can head into battle with a plane, tank, or ship, though the planes have got to be my personal favorite hands down. There's something about kicking on some Ace Combat or Bebop music and just lighting up other planes that really does it for me. Plus, when you hit certain elements of enemy vehicles, you get these little X-ray panels that pop up to show your rounds just shredding through their personnel. It's a really fun experience that makes flipping through the air, rolling across the ground, or being a big ocean ship that much cooler. So if any of this sounds like something you can get behind, feel free to check out War Thunder using my link in the description. The game's free to play on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation, and my link will net you quite a few cool bonuses. Thanks, guys. Now let's move over to the good stuff. These are some of my favorite quests in the game, though I would still say that most of them don't come close to some of the main quests that we'll be getting to later on. First up, we have the issue of all of the sick and wounded who came from Skalitz. This is a great quest, one that really highlights many of the aspects of medieval medicine and what its physicians had to put up with. The quest giver here is a tough woman from Skalitz named Johanka. She's the only woman working in the center of medical knowledge that is Sassau's monastery. And as such, she's at her wit's end with men who don't take her seriously and don't want to provide more aid during this crisis. The physician who normally operates here isn't equipped to deal with much else besides the occasional old monk complaining about their joints or the like, and this sudden rise of the infirmed is unprecedented. Henry's jobs here span many different issues, from helping a man who's been battered, to setting a broken leg, to dealing with someone who's been poisoned, to changing someone's bandages, to gaining more meat to help feed the sick, to bargaining for more supplies. It's a cavalcade of responsibilities and it's all timed, as many people will die if they aren't being helped quickly enough. Medical knowledge, being able to read and brew potions, and being able to convince or otherwise pay for help is all recommended here, making this a quest that you don't want to stumble into unprepared like I did the first time.
But you can have a look in the herbarium here.
Iramids Frofelsa ADN Ras Sasabs ADN Gorpshav HT Xni of Law.
Yeah, so I forgot about the reading part and had to hightail it over to Uzhitz to learn before galloping back and being able to read the herbarium so that I could help administer the right potions here. But that does bring up the idea of reading in this game, which is really fun to me in its own right. So basically, if you look at any book before this, it's just a load of scrambled letters. But if you go to pay a scribe to learn how to read, then the letters unscramble a bit. Basically, the first and last letters always tend to be the same, making it a lot easier to make out words in a book. And then as you read more and more, you learn new skills, and then eventually learn how to read the words without them being scrambled. Reading does take time, however, and it's something that you'd want to do while you wait typically. So it might take a certain amount of hours to read a book through before you can learn the skill that's attached to it. I really love this idea and the execution of it. And this medical quest pushed me to finally go get it done. So now that we can read, we can properly perform alchemy without having to look stuff up online. Actually, I'm unsure if you need to know how to read if you can just Google the recipes, but either way. It's a pretty rewarding thing to be able to brew potions in this game just by following instructions. The whole process looks tougher than it is. Basically, the recipe will tell you what you need and how to go about it, which is pretty standard for recipes. You take whatever herbs you need, set them aside, and then add them to whatever base. Then you cook it up however many times is necessary and then pour it into your bottle. It's really cool. In terms of the storyline that you follow along this very lengthy quest, there's a point where you have to convince the custodian of the area for more supplies. And this has you interacting with this very unpleasant man who doesn't give a shit about the sick and injured who are crowding the area. He does, however, care about Johanka, and as such, he's constantly asking about her and what she's up to. Later down the line, he bursts into the infirmary to tell Johanka that she's invited to a private feast, before melting in jealousy at the idea that Henry is here working with her. Here's the fun part. If you don't have enough speech to pass a compromise check, you can either tell him to shove off or you can stand down. If you do tell him to pack sand, he'll throw you into jail for a night. Now you would think, Well, it doesn't matter because I stopped this sleazeball from continuing to make unwanted advances towards Johanka. I mean, she's basically said at this stage that this guy is super unhelpful and only flirts with her when he drops by. But then when you get back from jail and say, hey, that custodian guy is a dick, huh? She's like, oh, I don't know about that. Great, I simped out for nothing. No one appreciates a nice guy in this world. I think the most interesting part about this entire questline though is just how much it goes against what modern day questing looks like in first-person action RPGs. I mean, let's think about it. Firstly, the whole thing is timed with different people dying faster than others. Okay, that's a little uncommon, but not unheard of by any means. But then secondly, it allows you to take the quest despite the fact that you can be completely unprepared for it. You can stumble in not knowing a thing about first aid, how to read, or anything required really to help out the best that you could. Thirdly, there's no tangible reward at the end of all of it. And I think that that's the most fascinating part of all because, well, could you imagine doing an hour's worth of questing in the Elder Scrolls and receiving a fond thank you for your work? But really, this whole quest had me learning to read, gave me alchemy experience and levels, taught me new potion recipes, had me improving my hunting skills, earned me a strength level when I set a man's broken leg, and did give me a reputation boost in addition to all of the other experience that I'm forgetting about. The whole journey is the reward, and I think that's pretty damn special, truth be told. Next up, we have the follow-up for the Executioner from earlier. This is definitely one of my favorite side quests, if not my favorite. Basically, there have been some really heinous criminals caught recently, but with the whole social outcast thing going on with Executioner Herman here, a very renowned executioner is being brought in for the purpose of killing these three men. Herman is pissed, and rightfully so. While he could take being looked at like a cursed soul, he can't deal with the idea that it's now costing him possibly the most important execution of his life. So Henry starts to work. First, he figures out what these criminals did, which leads to some gruesome details from the bailiff. Then he puts his reading skills to work and looks up what the sentencing would likely be for these people by figuring out their crimes and whether or not they were noblemen. Once he discovers this, he reports back to Herman, and the two plot out the best way to sabotage the execution and embarrass the guy that they're bringing in. So we've got a beheading, a hanging, and a torture to try to muck up. For the beheading, we steal the new executioner's sword and dull it so that it won't make a clean cut. For the hanging, we replace the rope with rotten rope that will snap. And for the torture, we poison the tongs so that the criminal will die immediately. It's a morbidly fascinating quest that really imparts a lot of knowledge about how big of an event executions were and what they entailed. The quest itself is a lot of stealth. I did not have a lot of stealth. What I did have was 6 or 7 savior schnapps. So yeah, I bumbled through and really forced my way through this one, making it a pretty big challenge for me. I do gotta say that the sword dulling bit reminded me that you can manually sharpen your blades in this game, which is also pretty damn cool. I used a mace last time, which I think you can technically sharpen, but it looks really stupid. When all is said and done, the cutscene shows the executioner just falling on his face in front of the crowd as everything goes wrong. I like this scene, but it really isn't as fulfilling as I wished that it would be. For one, it's really obvious that Henry could have messed up any part of this when the scenes very obviously cut in and out to play the corresponding result. I also really wish that Hanush would have reprimanded the executioner for screwing this up so badly. The whole scene is basically wordless beyond the criminals begging for their lives, which kinda makes it feel odd and janky. But the end result has Herman smiling and laughing about the whole ordeal, which is fine by me because he's probably one of my favorite characters in this game. Of course, you also could have told the new executioner that he was being plotted against, giving that extra pang of choice to this whole ordeal. Overall, it's a really fun quest that packs a sizable punch with the amount of options and outcomes, and you can tell that a lot of love went into it. One of the more out there quests involves Father Godwin. Those who have played this game know what he entails, and we'll get to that in a bit. But for now, the priest is convinced that 3 women in town have started practicing witchcraft. This quest starts out really tame, making you think that it's going to be something pretty standard. You go ask about some ointment that they've been using from a herb seller nearby. The ointment is made of 2 poisonous herbs which causes the user to see hallucinations. And the women want to use it because they've all lost people close to them with the ongoing conflict with the Cumans. So you follow them out to the woods where they've been applying the ointment to, Due to YouTube's recent crusade against certain forms of content, I won't be continuing this sentence. Thank you for your understanding. It's up to me to uphold these Christian values. But yeah, Henry can interfere with this ritual, which have the women tripping out of their minds and seeing him as the devil. They offer their bodies to him in exchange for him driving out the ecumens, which Henry can decline or accept. This is one of the few times where your choices don't matter here much at all, because their caressing causes the ointment to smear onto Henry. Look, one thing leads to another, and next Henry has to choose which animal to lockpick. You know, just normal, average gameplay, nothing weird. Of course, at this stage, the minions of the devil have come swarming in to kill the witches, and Henry has to destroy them with his sword of light. After several hours of tripping balls, Henry awakens to find out that 2 woodsmen tried to kill the witches and he killed them instead. If you choose to run away or kill the witches yourself, the women would be on the ground here. And by 15th century standards, that would have been the morally good choice. This is a fun quest, and reporting back to Godwin causes him to recoil in horror at the idea that Henry murdered 2 men for seemingly no reason. The last side quest that I'll talk about is kind of an odd one because it's technically required to complete one of the main quests correctly without actually being considered a main quest. Still, since it's marked as a side quest, I may as well mention it here. Later down the line in the main story, bandits attack a village, and soon after its citizens start falling ill to a pestilence. The symptoms described affected the horses first, then the other animals, and then the villagers who began showing signs of fever, unquenchable thirst, diarrhea, and stomach pain. That last one is probably redundant. Of course, you actually have to assess what these symptoms are before running back to Johanka to report it to her. If not, then people die basically. This whole round of investigation doesn't have the game giving you too much to go off of in terms of compass markers. But basically you have to go around and look for 4 houses which are marked with the plague cross in limestone, and then question the people inside. Or beat the shit out of one of them. It's kind of like hard mode questioning really. After getting everything in order, one of the monastery's brothers questions you on more of the specifics, which tests you to make sure that you were paying attention. After narrowing it down a little, Henry is to thumb through a medical tome to rule out various diseases, including the plague, which involves boils. The tome notes that all of these issues that these people are having describe poisoning from a water source to a tea. So you boil up a cure, administer it, and that's that. I know it sounds like it's a pretty direct quest with nothing special, but there's something about the lack of knowledge, the fear that grips everyone, and the way that they're convinced that they're suffering from a plague that really makes this quest interesting to me on a lot of different levels. You can fuck this up in so many different ways, and yet getting it right feels so good. All in all, Kingdom Come has some really solid side quests. Yes, of course, you're going to get the ones with very simple back and forth objectives. The ones where you simply perform your task and get paid. But even those at the start of the game feel more impressive when your character is such a dull blade. Once you start getting some experience and skills under your belt, taking on the higher end stuff feels so much more rewarding. Like you've prepared and learned to get over hurdles that you never could have without advancing Henry. Of course, if you just grind out levels and hyperfixate on a specific set of skills, then the easier tasks are going to become trivial fast, and you'll never get that same satisfaction from them. But even then, the stories attached along with the historical significance makes many of these quests worth doing anyway, at least in my opinion. They really help to tie the game together and make a trip from the main stuff feel so much more impactful. So moving back over to the main quest has us trying to figure out where that guy with the limp is. It's actually crazy thinking about where my Henry was at the start of this quest, and where he is now. He had shit armor, could barely carry anything, couldn't read, hardly knew how to fight, had stupid hair, couldn't sneak for shit, looked dumb with his dumbass tunic that represented his stupid-ass dead city, didn't know how to persuade a rock, and his horse was named Pebbles. Now it's like we went from level 3 to level 50. We have a Chad-ass haircut, beautiful armor with gauntlets won from a fighting tournament, can talk a bee into buying honey, can sneak a baby back into its mom, can hit a crab apple from 2 kilometers away with an arrow, and our horse is named Pebbles. Oh, and everyone addresses him as Sir Knight, and tells him that they're honored that a knight would take the time to talk to them. It's like a night and day difference, and it really makes me feel like I turned a page with old Henry here. So we find Limpy, who's been killed by the time that Henry got to him. You would think that it was because Henry decided to take a month to do everything under the sun, but this one always goes down this way. No one has any kind words about Limpy, mostly just calling him a no-good bastard more or less. But one of the rabble outside of his house notes that the guy was spending an awful lot of time with the priest, Father Godwin. Godwin won't tell you outright what Limpy was up to, feeling bound by a confessional that was given to him. Now at this stage I can convince the priest to give up the info, but I've never been able to do it even when all of my stats were higher than his and I beat the hell out of him. I looked it up after and there are multiple guides that state that you can convince Godwin to give up the info, but I could just never get it done. Regardless, this sets up probably my favorite scene in the entire game, though a lot of it is just due to the excellent background music. But just before this, Godwin meets with Henry for a drink and a way to brainstorm something that will help him out. He explains that if he were to start telling other people about his confessionals, then no one would trust the church anymore. So he claims that he'll come up with a different way in the morning. Until then...
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. Here, we'll drink to them. It's nice to see someone using their head to find things out instead of torture. We'll have to drink to that. Let's drink to that.
It's getting quite late. What are your plans, Father?
What do you suppose? We have a drink, of course.
Enough! Men, throw them out.
Henry, back me up.
You go. Had enough?
We can't do this, can we?
Who says? Get ringing, wench.
I love Father Godwin. He's a fiery preacher of the church, one that was originally nobility before this path led him to where he is now. And as such, a lot of his methods of preaching are unconventional when stacked against the usual stuff that you'd hear in the church around this time.
And stories from real life, with a nice moral to them, are popular as well. Especially if they're about fornication and similar scandalous vices.
And that's because he's a complete bastard of a priest who preaches the morals of the church while boozing, fucking, and generally going against everything that it typically stands for. He's an incredible character.
Oh, who the hell are you? Oh, Henry. My great friend, Henry. What have I forgotten?
Where the fuck am I?
What the fuck was it? Mass! Oh shit, I have to say mass. I gotta say mass. You have to help me. You can do the sermon for me.
What?
So yeah, we gotta fill in for the father here, who's in no shape to give a sermon after last night's escapades. The sermon goes as well or as poorly as your various speech skills allow for, ranging from a passionate but firm dissertation or a short and sweet speech where Henry kind of just phones it in.
You want to baptize a child?
Pay! You want to steal and murder?
Pay and you will have absolution.
What if the devil himself were to pay?
Would he ascend to heaven too?
Look to your consciences, you robbers of the poor.
For you are seen by God and his people too.
When all is said and done, Father Godwin decides that Henry's a good enough guy to break his oath to God and give him the info that he needs. This leads us to our next potential victim in all of this, Riki. There are some good nicknames in this game. Well, tracking down Riki is a whole muddled mess of information gathering, which showcases an idea of how difficult it probably was to straight up find someone who didn't want to be found in this time period. You ask around town for this guy and slowly the information points towards his dad, a bathhouse wench, and the innkeeper. All three of these have loose bits of information about each other and a poaching spot that Riki liked to hang out at. The poaching spot gets narrowed down to the woods somewhere around where the woodcutter's camp is. And then it gets narrowed down even further to one of 3 mine shafts in the area. If you want to, you can just go hit up these shafts, but common sense dictates that it's probably the one right next to the woodcutter's camp. As such, one of them will give you detailed instructions on how to get over to the hideout. I know it's a simple idea, but it's kind of fun to sleuth this stuff out this way. If you're quick enough, you'll find a scared out of his mind Riki, who will give up the info that you need before bandits attack. If you were too slow like I was, the bandits already got to the guy, and he's on his deathbed. This game does time stuff like this pretty well, although I'm never exactly sure how long I have or if a mission is timed, and I kind of wish it would convey that a quest is timed when you get it. You will occasionally get someone telling you something like, "I can only stall for 7 days," or something explicit like that, but sometimes you just decided to dick around too much and wound up paying for it. Alright, on to the next friend in the Thug Platoon. This one's a little more interesting because it has a myriad of outcomes and options. So you go looking for the next guy who Riki told you about named Timmy. You head to a windmill and talk to his sister, who pulls you around back of the mill to tell you Timmy's location before 4 thugs round the corner to interrogate you. You have some choices here. You can tell them that you don't know anything, you can take them on in a fight, you can tell them that Timmy is somewhere that he isn't, you can tell them Timmy's real location, or you can do that last one and actually join the thugs in hunting Timmy. I fought all of them the first time, though it was a tough fight that took a lot of tries at the level that I was at. This time I tell them that Timmy's somewhere else, and 3 of them take off. The 4th one now follows me around everywhere, which, This was the much easier route since I can now just head over to Timmy and finally get the location of the bandit camp that started this whole mess. Alternatively, if I had joined up with or allowed the thugs to kill Timmy, it would have led to the bandits themselves telling me about the camp. And to go even further than that, I could head to the camp at the bandits' invitation, only for the leader there to state that he doesn't trust Henry and order everyone to descend on him. Regardless, the next quest has Sir Radzig ordering Henry to scout out the bandit camp. If you've allied yourself with the thugs, you can actually make your way around the camp unmolested if you avoid particular people. And you can also do this by equipping a full cumin outfit, seeing as the bandits are working with them. Otherwise, you have to sneak around with optional objectives to sabotage the camp in various ways. This is where the game really starts to shine with just how many options you have to complete a quest. I know that most people are probably just gonna go down the good guy Henry stealth route, but the fact that you can think, well, what if I just dress as a cumin? And it actually works? That's really damn cool. I didn't do any sabotage this time around just because I did it before and it didn't really seem to affect too much. I might be wrong on that, but I think it's just a side objective for immersion and reputation. Maybe some money. Reporting back to Radzig has you giving him the details on everything that you just witnessed. And then he sends you off to the Lord of Talmberg Sir Divish for reinforcements. And now we have the first real big battle of this game. And unfortunately, this is where Kingdom Come stumbles a bit. Of course, the idea is cool, raiding an enemy base and all that, but the gameplay itself isn't really structured or prepared for this amount of bodies on the field. First off, it's Lag City when there are more than, I don't know, say 10 to 15 people on the screen. Second of all, this battle is as exceedingly easy or difficult as you make it. If you want, you can stick behind your forces, maybe pick off a stray soldier with a swing or an arrow, and you'll eventually make it further in. But if you want to just go berserk on the enemy, you can pretty much get away with it unfettered, especially if your stats are trained up in any meaningful capacity. While I have to give it to the devs for trying to create battles on this scale, it's hard to say that it paid off when they could have had a lot of this battle take place in a cutscene while Henry is tasked with something in the background that has him taking on an appropriate amount of enemies. I'm not sure if that narrative would have felt as good, all things considered, but I feel like it could have worked around a lot of the issues of large-scale combat without taking away too much of the gravity. Either way, Henry finally corners the bastard who took his dad's sword away, and 1v1s him in the burning wreckage of the church here. It's a very easy fight with my skills where they're at, which actually kind of deflates all of this buildup that was here until now. But either way, old Runt here takes the secret of where the sword is to the grave. After the battle, Henry is praised, even if he did smash Runt's face into the floor until he died without giving up intel. A small scene then plays out after this, showing the faceless entity that will be our next main villain. Soon after, the bandits begin attacking even more brazenly than they did before, hitting several hamlets and the village of Merhoyed. Oh, and they've been minting nearly limitless amounts of fake gold to pay for even more hired soldiers.
Are you saying what I think you're saying, Master Tobias? This here
is just a pile of copper.
Kurva! Fuck!
It's up to Henry once again to head over to Merhoyed, as the town has managed to fight off its aggressors while taking one of them hostage. This is where we get the details of the attack, as well as the aforementioned outbreak of pestilence that's ripping through the town. In terms of the main quest though, the head honcho of Merhoyed won't let you speak to the prisoner until you've helped them out. And even if you do break into where the prisoner's being held, it becomes clear that he's plague-ridden and unfit to interrogate anyway. So what makes the pestilence quest from earlier a side quest? Well, you can fail it.
Melikar, where's the captive? What happened?
He died, Henry. That's what happened.
Yeah, you can botch the whole thing, have everyone die including the prisoner, and then, well, his body has a letter on it which leads to the next quest anyway. What you do get if you manage to cure everyone is a lot more context. The prisoner gives up everything to Henry, including who he reports to, where the counterfeit coin supposedly comes from, who the boss is, and several other superfluous details. For this video, the important stuff is that the guy's another link in the bandit chain, and that he receives the counterfeit coin directly from a particular merchant. The faceless leader from before is simply referred to as the chief, and he seems to be a foreigner who came from nobility, though not much is known about him beyond this. After the interrogation, one of the peasants busts him with a knife, and no one could stop him apparently, not even the fully armed guard who guarded this barn before. If you can't convince the peasant to stand down, he guts the prisoner. This kind of feels like an alternative route for the sake of an alternative route, but I guess I can't really complain in all honesty. Not every choice is going to have the weight of the world attached to it, and I'm still overall glad that you can have several different experiences in nearly every quest. Either way, if you can, you have to escort the guy back to Talmberg before meeting up with Radzig. He of course sends you after the merchant who brings in the coins, which for the sake of expediency at this stage leads to another goose chase. You show up to where the guy is supposed to be, surprise, a conflict has happened, and you follow a trail of blood, only for a German knight to show up and confront one of the nearby charcoal burners. Henry winds up chasing this guy for a bit, fights him, and then interrogates him. This is Ulrich, someone who was sent from Bavaria to investigate these counterfeits. He won't say who he's serving or give you too much extra information about himself personally. Instead, he tells you what happened and how he jumped the merchant to try to get information from him. The horse that the merchant was riding wound up throwing him off, killing him on the spot. It'd be another dead end if it weren't for the fact that Ulrich has a written confession from one of the counterfeiters, which has a load of technical information that he can't parse. So it's up to Henry to take it back to Rattay to get it looked at. I know from a summary point of view, most of this stuff seems to be, and then we chase this guy, and then he tells us about this guy, and then the next guy gives us info to give to this guy. But again, the game's strong suit is the intrigue revolving around what this time period was like, and what was entailed in an investigation of this nature. I personally enjoy it quite a lot, even if there isn't a ton to add to it from an analysis point of view. Now that said, this next stretch is a little bit more gamey if you think about it. Like, this Ulrich guy is sitting on these documents, but he can't make heads or tails of the technical terms, right? Okay, that makes sense. But then you go over to the treasurer in Rattay and he looks them over and goes, ah, yeah, so it looks like they use a mix of silver and quicksilver for the forgeries. I'd check around Sasau to see if anyone's working overtime on the stuff. Now, Sasau is where Ulrich is staying. First of all, for someone as sharp-witted as Ulrich seems to be, you'd think that he would have figured to sniff around Sasau's blacksmith refineries if he already knew that the coin was coming out of Sasau. Secondly, when you tell him about the quicksilver, he goes, oh, that makes so much sense, because this painter was complaining about a lack of quicksilver, and also there were these people complaining about a certain blacksmith keeping them up all night. Like, the guy had all of the pieces, and for some reason Henry just saying the word quicksilver made him realize that this was all happening. And even then, for as dedicated as this guy is, he just lets Henry handle everything while he kicks back with a pint. I don't know, it's not like it ruins anything for me, but it is a bit of a weak spot in the story. Fortunately, this next investigation shows off just how easy it was for someone with influence and wealth to turn a town upside down, as you look into how exactly this whole situation came to be. But none of them are the masterminds and have simply been coerced or scared into helping this operation. There's the guy in charge of the quicksilver who was threatened and bribed. There's the blacksmith who knew not to fuck with these people. There's the hired mercenaries who were paid to watch for a wagon and make sure that nothing happened to it. And there's the master engraver's apprentice who had his woman kidnapped and was forced to steal punch dies in order to keep her alive. All of these people are being held at knife point by this villain named Rapota, and a mysterious-looking knight. And the more that you learn, the more sinister this whole thing becomes. It's intriguing and fun to delve into, much like most of the other investigations in this game. Even when you finally catch up to this Rapota guy, he's not the end boss here.
Now tell me where their workshop is.
Of course. That will be the best solution.
So?
Let's leave it for another time.
Turns out that the knight that's been seen with him is a former noble named Sir Yezik, who was directly under a lord who had his land seized from him when he sided with the wrong people. Since Yezik was directly under this lord, he fought back against the seizure before being locked away and set free by Rapota here. Yezik was the one who set to work with this forgery business, though even he serves yet another higher up in the chain. Rapota at least parts with the information that Yezik's forgery operation is set in the mines of Skalitz, which you think would have been looked into by now. I mean, those things were only recently trampled by the humans. You would think that it'd be a pretty high priority to get them back in business. Regardless, you can choose to bring Ulrich with you to the mines, or go it alone. Taking him with me seems like the obvious answer, and leads to the better scene. When the operation concludes, we corner Yezik, who Ulrich tries to kill. It was revealed earlier by the treasurer that Ulrich works for the Rosenbergs, an opposing family who disagrees with Radzig's ways. When Henry brings up the idea that Ulrich could simply serve Radzig instead, he declines, but admits that even people knowing who he works for is enough to get him killed by the Rosenbergs. So he leaves Henry to do as he pleases with Yezik, wandering off to find work the way that he has time and time again. I like Ulrich as a character a lot, despite him not being someone who's front and center in all of this. He's just this wandering, highly skilled knight, one without a crest or a lord. He can usually get shit done, much like Henry, but his lack of allegiance has its purposes as well as its hindrances. And now we have possibly one of the best string of quests in the entire game overall, depending on who you ask. I personally think it really showcases the things that Kingdom Come does best, from being able to play the quest your way, to having several outcomes, to getting truly immersed in your surroundings. So basically you find out from Yezik what you need to know about the guy who put him in charge of the forgeries, and this new guy is well connected to the church. Radzig's concerned about the idea that a monk may be involved, because he would have no legal authority over the church. So you head back to Sasau to figure out how to pose as a potential new recruit for a gang that seems to be connected to all of this. The cool part about all of this is that it's pretty easy if you've been kicking around Sasau already and making connections. In my case, one of the people I saved during the infirmary quest is willing to point me to the right place. When Henry meets with this group to be recruited, they have an initiation test for him.
Right, I'm to slip into the best guarded place in the entire region and kill someone. Take his dice and money, and then go to the swamp and wait by the fire.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Yeah, this one's a doozy. So this whole thing can be as simple or as complex as you want it to be, if you have the right skill sets. You can just bust into the monastery, kill the guy, and be done with it if you want. Or you can go through with this charade, which involves you taking the place of a nobleman who is going to join the monastery and using the guise of a new recruit to get close and figure out who the person that you need to kill is. Obviously, I'll be doing the latter here.
It doesn't sound like an easy task, sir. Getting into the cloisters, finding Pius, and then getting him to the bailiff.
Far from it, lad. But I have confidence in your abilities. Goodbye.
Yeah, great, thanks. So in order to get in, I gotta give up everything. My weapons, armor, food, savior schnapps, lockpicks, everything. And then, well...
We have gathered here today to welcome a new novice into our midst.
In loquium tuum vivam, et non confundas me ab expectatione me.
It's real uncomfortable, and the whole scene is great at showing what someone who's decided to give their life to the church goes through. It also shows the OG hairstyle for Henry in this scene, which tends to happen in these pre-rendered scenes occasionally. There are a lot of specific quests here, as life in the monastery isn't free from politics, and everyone seems to have something that they want done. You're expected to behave at all times, rise before the sun, attend everything that needs tending to at specific times for pretty much the entire day, and get a small handful of hours for free time before having to do it all over again. If you mess up, get caught doing certain things, or just don't show up at your proper place on time, you're likely to get reprimanded and put into solitary confinement. Too much of this and you'll be thrown out.
You call that a copy? You've completely ruined the parchment with your scribbling.
It's essentially a hard reset on Henry here. None of the tools that he usually has at his disposal, or coin to his name. And it makes stealing anything worthwhile at first just so you can trade them to one of the more dubious brothers here for stuff like lockpicks. Now I'm not going to go through every single bit of content here, because you could realistically spend hours and hours gathering information, learning about the various brothers, choosing sides for certain activities, and so on. And it's a really rewarding experience overall, one that really left an impact on me. And I'm not going to reveal which novice is the person that we're trying to kill, and instead just talk about the possibilities here. You can run around between each novice and straight up ask them about the man that you're looking for, which is something that you really only want to do when you trust that they aren't the right person. They all tend to point fingers at each other, but you'll really only learn which one it is by completing various tasks and paying attention, or by telling the correct guy that you're looking for him, which will prompt him to poison you. You won't die from it, and it'll actually lead to another branching path from here. If you figure out who did it without the poisoning, you can kill him whenever you want by skulking around for a knife. But the guards are going to find out fast, so you'll want an escape route. Hell, if you wanted to, you could just blindly attack all of the novices like a lunatic and hope that you make it out alive. There is another route to all of this though, because Radzig doesn't want you to wholesale slaughter someone in the monastery. And the bandits who put you up to this want the man's dice as proof in addition to hearing about someone being murdered. So you could simply steal the dice from him, and then kill any of the novices before looking for a way out of there. Or you could work together with the guy by plotting an escape and staging a murder. And even when you do escape with him, you can choose to turn him into Radzig or let him go. And honestly, I'm sure there's a couple of other routes that I'm missing here, but I think this pretty much encapsulates just how well put together this part of the game is. I know it doesn't sound like much, and maybe it really isn't to a lot of people, but I really do love how intricate everything about the monastery quests are, and what it brings to the table in terms of doing things your way. It's a masterstroke of quest design, and it also helped me to continue to appreciate how well the architecture in this game is done. It isn't something that I've really touched on, but every place in this game is modeled after real-world medieval architecture, and all of its towns and buildings are really smartly designed. But at the end of the road, regardless of how you accomplish it, you'll find yourself with your freedom and the dice needed to prove your worth to these shitheads. Holy hell, there's really something special about having all of your hard-earned gear taken from you only to re-equip it and feel whole again. Let's get into the final leg of this thing. So after meeting with the bandits to prove that you've done the job, they point you in the direction of a previously abandoned fort. Heading back to Sir Hanush and Radzig has Hanush telling Henry to go scout out the new camp, same as last time. And this is where Radzig goes, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, that is way too dangerous. Motherfucker, the amount of stuff that you've had me soloing at this stage is staggering, and now it's too dangerous?" I guess you could claim that Radzig now cares more deeply about Henry, but I don't know. It just seems weird that Henry was just sent to do this same thing a week ago. Heading into the fort has the game telling you that you're at a point where other quests may be affected, but we don't care about that. Theoretically, you could just pop in, have a look around at the fortifications, tents, and amount of men, but Henry still wants to get his hands on his father's sword. So he plays along and reports to the combat master, who's the same guy who taught him the basics in Skalitz. There's a bit of a full circle moment as the guy goes down in 2 hits. But to me, it was less about overcoming my first instructor and more about showing that the guy who was teaching piss-poor peasants was never that good to begin with. And finally, the chief is revealed after all of this time, and he recognizes Henry. So this is probably one of the oddest reveals of the game just because, well, I didn't even recognize this dude the first time that I played. But this is the foreign noble all the way at the beginning, who came in to check out Radzig's sword alongside Radzig. Now to be fair, this is a pretty realistic reveal. I mean, had this Eastvan guy always been around for Henry to talk to, there probably would have been some questions about how he was constantly pulling strings to help the bandits unite without someone noticing. But from a narrative point of view, we don't have a lot of attachment to the person as a character. I think it would have been nice if Eastvan had been visiting for at least one other quest, one that required Henry's help just so that the player would be more likely to know a little bit more about him. But I guess it is what it is, and I still do understand that these guys didn't just want to have to work out the logistics as to why and how Eastvan would be kicking around somewhere like Rattay while simultaneously leading Sigismund's rebel forces. Obviously, Henry gets captured here and knocked around before Eastvan gives him the big plot twist, that Radzig is actually his real father. This one has been pretty well hinted at, but it's still something that some people might have just not caught on to. Replaying the game actually had me appreciating quite a few of the smaller lines that hint at something bigger going on here, which were comprised of things that I didn't really make note of the first time around. Eastvan's plan is to now ransom Henry back to his real dad for a large sum of money, further increasing the potential gap between his bandit army and the combined forces of Divish, Hanush, and Radzig. Before that can happen though, another familiar face in the form of the asshole who sicked Runt on us reappears to free us this time. Turns out that the banditing life wasn't what he thought it would be, and now he wants to free Henry so that he could potentially get paid and live a semi-normal life. I like this reveal more because there's definitely a lot more to go off of with the amount that we've interacted with this guy. It's hard to forget someone who led Runt to us when we were only trying to bury our parents. And now here we are again. Itemless, weaponless, armorless. Now the smart thing to do would be to cut our losses, escape over the wall that was pointed out to us, and try to slowly rebuild our inventory. But I mean, that's my gear in that tent. I worked my ass off to buy and earn all of it. My gear may just be the most important character in this game. And honestly, retrieving the gear isn't all that bad if the garden side plays nice. The first time he just kinda sat inside the office and stared at me, but after reloading he comes out to patrol. Sneaking into the office is easy enough, and the key is on the desk. Leaving is also surprisingly easy if you stick to the shadows along the left side of the encampment. But that may have also been due to the stealth brew that I discovered while rummaging around the office. Regardless, you can leave as loudly or as quietly as you want, and once you're over you can decide what to do with the guy who helped you to escape. You can either beat him up there, have him escort you back and rewarded for it, or you can have him escort you and call him out for betraying you before.
As a token of my gratitude, please accept this reward.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your generosity.
Things are immediately awkward between Radzig and Henry, as Henry reveals that he knows the truth. Radzig's like, well, I mean, I was gonna tell you, but, well, you know. Anyways, welcome back, son, please. Call me Papa. Yeah, sure, might as well. The issue now is that Eastvan was obviously confident enough to tell Henry his plan like all good evil villains do, meaning that it's time to assemble the troops for full-on war against Eastvan's forces. This has quite a few back-to-back cutscenes unfolding for you to enjoy, which I thoroughly did. They're really good at conveying the emotion of assembling a troop, riding to the fortress, attempting to parley, drawing up a battle plan and marching into battle. That said, again, well, the lag of a slew of entities on screen does tend to detract from everything. Still, hard to let it ruin a cool-ass scene like this. I do have to say it surprised me that this whole battle was supposed to be about 100 men versus another 100. I have no idea how big or small these towns where these three lords came from were supposed to be, but I guess I expected each of them to have 50 to 150 fighting men. It's probably just movies and the like that have dramatized that for me, but it really puts the scale of how small these cities were compared to, say, Prague or the like. I did find it funny how Henry has to stick out during the scene though, so he's just standing there like a dumbass with no helmet on. The fight itself is a bit of a mess. In order to prevent lag, I imagine, Warhorse got a little creative in how they put everything together, which makes it feel more like a stitched-together amalgamation of a fight rather than one seamless battle. So basically, you'll play out one bit, then it will load another, then another, and then another. And so you wind up killing off maybe 10 to 15 men total before getting to the end. But it's broken up between these 4 or so parts. It's not a bad workaround, but it definitely reminds you that you're playing a AA game in the moment. After rolling through and just crushing the bandit force, Eastvan is nowhere to be found. Maybe it had something to do with that parlay that gave them a few hours to prepare. Or maybe it was because Istvan immediately started marching towards Talmberg with most of his forces after Henry escaped because he knew that the castle would be left unguarded more or less. In fact, one could say that he let Henry escape in order to do this. I mean, when you think about it, the primary reason for him to keep Henry alive was so that he could ransom him back to his father. But the guy's already sitting on heaps of counterfeit money, so he probably did this on purpose. Yeah, Istvan is pretty good. And it doesn't feel ridiculous that he got a leg up on these guys. It feels like a smart move overall. With Istvan commanding the castle and taking Divish's wife hostage, he's now holding all of the cards. Oh, and just in case the player didn't care about Divish's wife, they also threw Henry's father into the mix because why not? I don't know, seeing Radzig taken hostage also always felt a bit silly. Not that it's terribly unrealistic, but more because, again, it feels like it's just there to add more to the drama. But yeah, I guess he got captured when he charged ahead of Divish and the others. Whatever. At this point, the big oaf Hanush is like, well, guess we gotta knock down your castle, sorry buddy. But Divish's Knight Commander suggests a stealth operation instead. So we suit up and get ready for the night raid, which has Sir Hans joining us. He's still a jackass, but a welcome one in this dire hour. This quest is, well, it's not good. Which is unfortunate because it had potential to be great. It's one of the few quests that don't allow you to approach it the way that you want to, and always has you getting caught by the end of it. It starts out fine enough, with Henry having to take out 2 guards before heading to the hostage area. But that's also where it ends, as Hans is always spotted and gets shot in the ass with an arrow. I have to think that there was a plan to create a different outcome here, but either the devs were pressed on time and resources, or they knew that the following missions would have a lot more impact and should be seen by the player. Still, there were many breakpoints where maybe this could have led to something more. Maybe Henry gets spotted and Hans gets killed over it. Maybe you can raise the portcullis from the inside, leading to a nighttime raid by reinforcements. Maybe Henry can choose to try to press in further to find the Lady of Talmberg, his dad, or his dad's sword. Maybe he has to choose who to go for. But as things stand, the hostages that they find are ordinary villagers, and Hans always gets shot in the ass, prompting the player to pick him up and escape. Even then, the whole mission harps on a critical issue with stealth in this game, which is that guards tend to react to certain things verbally, but don't act. So basically you'll get the whole Oblivion guard thing of, what was that? Who goes there? Must have been the wind. Over and over while you creep through this area. I don't know, it's just not a good quest. And it should have probably been stripped from the game rather than left as is. Either way, with all other options exhausted, it's time to build a trebuchet, which is much more superior than the catapult as we all know. The bad news is that the mining engineer doesn't quite know how to build a siege engine. The worst news is that everyone is completely demoralized and we're out of beer. So Henry's gotta play innkeeper here and ask around for beer, snatch up any bit of meat, and shop around for pitch from the local charcoal burners. And finally, you can snatch up some 5-hour energy so that the men can stay awake during their watch shifts, as well as a young priest and an old priest. Pretty much everything here is optional beyond the trebuchet bit. If you do decide to run around and do all of this, the battle will be a lot easier. The issue, if you consider it as one, is that you'll be doing a lot of busy work. Hunting for 200 meat, brewing 60 potions, hopping from inn to find more beer, shit like that. A lot of this stuff can be made easier if you formed relationships with the people that you're going to for help. Godwin will immediately accept the task of helping Divish to lift the spirits of his men. Same goes for the monk physician who you helped out at the monastery. The charcoal burners are happy to help send pitch since they remember Henry from when he helped out Ginger. Even the potion lady in the woods will brew everything for you if you have a high enough reputation. It's actually kind of a pleasant revisiting of all of these places that you've been around throughout this game. People greet Henry in the streets and are eager to help. Of course, this is because I was generally helpful throughout the game, and I have to wonder what kind of inflection would be going on here if I had played this like an asshole the entire time. As far as getting the trebuchet built, we have to head over to Sasau in order to enlist the help of a genius engineer by the name of Conrad. This is a whole other can of worms, as Conrad has been commissioned by the church to help with the reconstruction of the monastery. Since Sasau is a neutral city, they don't care enough to take Conrad away from something this important, so some convincing is in order. As nearly always, you have several ways to go about this. For one, you can pickpocket the wages intended for the monastery workers from the overseer who reports directly to the abbot of the church. This will open up the option to bribe him to let Conrad leave so that he can help with the trebuchet. You can also win against the overseer at dice to deprive him of these wages. The only issue I have with this route is that the amount that you need to procure from him is 50 groschen, but the amount needed to get him to give up Conrad is well over 1,000. The easier route for me instead was sneaking up to his chest, stealing a contract between him and the abbot, and then getting a forgery drafted up stating that Conrad is allowed to assist in the trebuchet construction.
Go to the Sasau scribe and say to him, the fox isn't half as clever as he thinks. Then he'll do as you ask.
The fox isn't half as clever as it thinks.
What?
The fox!
Jackass!
Conrad Kieser sent me.
Why the hell didn't you say so?
That sod. He deliberately lied to me to make me look stupid.
Yeah, Conrad's a good character. Probably helps that he was voice acted and mocapped by Brian Blessed. After replacing the original document, you can show the forgery to the overseer, who will begrudgingly let the engineer help out. But that's not the end of this quest quite yet. Old Conrad was part of Sigismund's posse for a little while before he wound up having a falling out with the guy. And now Conrad's a bit jumpy at the prospect that someone may be out to get him. You can meet up with this someone who is also known to be part of Sigismund's group, who claims that him and Conrad were friends before they parted ways. Waiting around at midnight reveals otherwise, as the guy creeps up to Conrad's door and attempts to pick it open. If you confront him, he claims that he didn't know that Conrad lived here, and that he was only trying to get to the spice trader who owes him. You can't really see through this deception, even if you choose to state that you don't believe this dude. Because then Henry will report to Conrad and state that nothing bad is happening, and that his old friend was just here to settle up with the spice trader. The spice trader does live here off to the left side of the building, but if you leave the door open so that this guy can get in, he'll veer right towards Conrad's room. He'll also promptly receive a sword to the chest by Conrad's personal guard, so I guess that's that issue solved. Still, it seems like I should have had some more options with the would-be assassin rather than believe him blindly or kill him. Oh well, at least we have our engineer now.
But I am very fond of Rocchetta, and I always think what Alexander the Great might have accomplished with them.
Of course, building a war machine from scratch takes time. And after all that time passes, reinforcements from Istvan are spotted marching towards our own. This means that we have to ward them off and rout them while still holding on to our own camp. Henry gets assigned control over the Skalitz men, leading them in a flanking position. This in particular really shows how far Henry's come. Yes, of course he's been assigned with important missions up until this point, but he was always treated as expendable, even if he was told to be careful. I mean, he was sent into multiple enemy camps to scout them out. You don't do that with someone that you can't afford to lose. But now he's leading at least a small troop, which escalates pretty quickly when the enemy goes after the trebuchet. This battle is a long, seamless one to counter the one from earlier, though it also involves quite a bit of jogging. Of course, in order to keep things at a steady speed, trying to canter with your horse causes it to buck you off, which I found to be stupid when I believe my horse is the bravest one in the game. Look, I just wanted to be the 100-man slayer and do it all myself. What's wrong with that?
Nothing less from the commander of the Hawks Raiders. You're a... God damn it, that's weird for Captain Guts!
You did a good job.
Thanks, Captain Guts.
If I got a little carried away out there,
did.
I apologize.
But either way, the battle is won. And what's more, Istvan's right-hand man is taken hostage. One that seems to have a romantic connection to Istvan, meaning that we can exchange him for Divish's wife and Radzig. Well, if Istvan were stupid. He isn't, so he doesn't agree to the exchange. He does at least let us see the hostages, though.
Greetings, friends. Fear not, Lord Toth is treating us like royalty.
With no other option, we start hammering the castle with the trebuchet before storming it and hoping for the best. Interestingly enough, Henry is given the option to either storm the gate or to attack the western wall, but the decision is automatically made for the player, making me think that multiple final battles were possible in the initial development plan. Regardless, this cutscene is cool, and the battle that follows is fun. It's a good last hurrah, again encompassing all of the progress that Henry has made since his days as an uneducated peasant out in the middle of nowhere. When we finally breach the inner walls, Istvan agrees to an exchange of hostages to secure his freedom. Henry and Hans don't understand why we wouldn't just kill him after the exchange, but the older crowd of leaders all know that a nobleman only holds as much power as he does honor. Istvan takes Radzig with him to the border for extra security, and keeps the sword that Henry's been pursuing for the entire game. When all is said and done, Hans pursues Istvan and Henry reunites with his dad again. The two talk things over, with Radzig explaining why he left Henry in the hands of his adoptive father before they ride off to Talmberg. The credits roll and you really see how small this dev team was when compared to the scope of the game. They did do an incredible job, all things considered, though I'm sure a lot of people only ever saw this game for the bugs and quirks that stood out. After the credits, a post-scene plays out showing Henry dreaming of his adoptive dad again, and saying all of the things that he wanted to say to him. It's a bittersweet moment, as Henry's true feelings come out even though he tends to keep them wrapped up inside while all of the other world's problems assault him. One of the guards from Skalitz wakes Henry as the epilogue kicks off when Radzig calls for him. These final scenes exude a high amount of charisma, and feel really good to watch unfold. It feels like I've really gotten to know Henry, even if I've played him a certain way. I do have to wonder how I'd feel if I had been a bastard towards everyone for the entire game though. I mean, with me playing Henry as a very helpful and noble person, these scenes feel completely perfect the way that they are. But I think I wouldn't have appreciated them as much if I had stolen from and killed innocents as a sort of bandit king. Oh, and just to really drive home the idea that this game has a few kinks, I got stopped and searched by the same fucking guard that woke me up right as I went to go meet up with Radzig. And then I went to leave again and the guy right next to him stopped and searched me as well. Man, being a noble isn't easy in Ratai. So this whole epilogue scene is just an absolute pile of exposition. It's all done to set up a potential sequel, which I believe has been confirmed at this stage. But I'm just gonna hit the basics here. So Sigismund and Wenceslas have a cousin who's also been mentioned repeatedly throughout the game, Margrave Jobst. He was initially on Sigismund's side, helping him to abduct Wenceslas. Suddenly though, Jobst had a change of heart, and has now decided that Sigismund isn't worth working with. He explains that Sigismund is having a hard time holding on to the Hungarian crown while also trying to lock down the Bohemian one, which means that the lords that have backed him up until this point are getting nervous. While Jobst definitely seems to be holding back information so that he can drizzle honey into the ears of the Bohemian lords, the fact remains that we've reached a breaking point, and it's possible that all of this can be resolved without further bloodshed. With this information, Hans volunteers to go meet with this so-called League of Lords, the ones that have sided against them until now. Henry is to be his bodyguard, and can quiz Radzig on all of these complicated relationships before they set out to meet with them. It's an interesting epilogue, and I understand why it was thrown in here after the credits, because it's basically a lore dump, and it involves figures that have only occasionally been mentioned throughout the events of this game. I'm not entirely sure that it hits the same notes when I know for a fact that it won't be useful information for a while still, but I guess I can get behind the idea of it at the very least. And finally, Hans and Henry ride off into the sunset, with Henry stating that he's eager to get his father's sword back, further setting up a sequel. Kingdom Come Deliverance has to be one of the most interesting intersections of realistic mechanics, intricate systems, historical accuracy, and multi-approach questing that I've ever seen. And it's strange because nearly every single one of these descriptors has an asterisk next to it that reveals contradiction to some degree. It is realistic, but you can get perks that allow you to not have to eat or sleep as long as you stand still, or always get a high stealth bonus if you remain still while crouched, or suddenly carry a third more than you could before. Combat has a lot of moving parts, but by the endgame I tended to just swing up and down while occasionally parrying. The events are historically accurate from what I know, but there's also definitely a very skewed representation of the facts. Questing can usually be approached in a variety of ways, but there are a few pretty notable outliers in the main line that make it harder to play a less noble version of Henry. And the thing about all of these caveats is that they're all, if not almost all, intentional. You're supposed to start out as the weakest version of Henry, one who struggles with everything. And when you unlock those more extravagant perks, it makes you feel like you've made a large leap forward. Systems like combat are supposed to get easier both with player practice and level progression. Historical details are skewed more towards the Bohemian/Czech perspective because that's who we're playing as. Of course they viewed Cumans as savage barbarians, even if a lot of their culture was overall rich and intricate in its own way. And time and budget constraints are always going to call for cuts to certain quests and outcomes. But all of these explanations do lead to probably the biggest issue that Kingdom Come has. It's not friendly to a more casual player at the start, and it's not very extreme by any margin by the end for those expecting a more realistic experience. And of course you can make the game as difficult as you want. You can choose not to take the perks that make the game easier, or read to train up your skills, or pay for training. But you can't make the game friendlier for those who want a more casual experience at the beginning, which is the biggest issue that's going to stop people from trying or enjoying Kingdom Come. There's no option to change the Save Your Schnapps system. Carrying weight is going to be oppressive for the first 10 or so hours. Fighting against multiple people is a death sentence. Fast traveling has the potential to outright set your progress back by a couple of minutes to an hour depending on when you do it and what you run into. These issues are going to dishearten a lot of people, even if they're all part of systems that I personally didn't have as much of an issue with, at least not enough of one to keep me from enjoying the game. I've had about 3 or 4 friends tell me that they had too many issues with combat and the save system to make it worth it for them to continue playing. And I have to say that I completely understand that sentiment. But for me, the trial of figuring out how to forge Henry into a behemoth of fighting, fabricating, and fucking was what made so many of Kingdom Come's systems coalesce into something glorious. There are a lot of moving parts in this game. Some are great, and others are, well, an attempt. But overall, Warhorse Studios set out to create the medieval experience, and they succeeded at that more often than not. There's something about how Kingdom Come Deliverance handles its quests that really make me forget about a lot of my usual questing complaints, even if the game still technically commits a lot of these same sins that I criticize other games for. Yes, there are different outcomes for a lot of quests depending on how Henry handles them, but oftentimes you'll begin a main quest, something will happen, and the same outcome will ensue no matter what. Which, again, is something that I've given a lot of other games flack for. What Warhorse has done here is something that remedies the disdain that I tend to feel in these scenarios. Because it's not like, oh, I chose this dialogue and the NPC got mad at me before giving me the quest anyway. Or, I chose the dumb guy option and the NPC still gave me the high intelligence task regardless. Many times the quest giver will just tell you to fuck off. People will die due to your incompetence. And while sure there are other routes to the same result, those journeys create enough depth to actually make the whole experience feel different. A town will die and you'll feel like an asshole for getting distracted long enough to let it happen. You'll lack a critical skill and wind up having to take a completely different approach. You can oftentimes play as a thug or a shining knight, and the inflection of either will shine throughout the process. It's a renaissance of learning, adapting, and perfecting someone who started out as a lazy peasant and turned into something so much more. The story of Henry is one that I enjoyed a lot more than I thought I would, judging from his plain and unassuming introduction. He starts out as a complete nobody with seemingly no potential, and gets thrown into the chaos of the events around this time and place in history. Then he does the tiniest jobs for Bohemia, which eventually snowball into more and more important investigations and missions. And investigations is a big key word here. A huge chunk of what Henry does isn't just running down bandits and stealing objects. It's talking to people, getting their story, understanding the social climate surrounding their request, piecing together what happened and making an assessment. It sounds weird, but I would almost compare the game to a medieval LA noire at times. There's so much emphasis on talking to people so that you as a player can comprehend what is and isn't proper in these times, what should and shouldn't be happening, where you need to go and who you need to talk to. And the speech system is pretty good at rewarding the player for understanding who they're talking to and what they'll react to most positively. As time goes on and Henry continues to prove himself, he becomes more and more ingratiated into the upper echelon of Bohemia. Eventually he becomes the linchpin of any kind of success that his allies see. And that's a pretty standard way of telling the story of a hero. But Henry doesn't ever feel like your stereotypical hero. He consistently still doesn't know things, replies with goofy ideas, and looks like he would blend into a crowd of peasants without his fancy armor. He's a good example of an everyman who rose up to become someone more in this hellish landscape of social and political peril. And by the end of it, I didn't feel like I was playing as some god-sent hero, I felt like I was playing as an above-average dude who could hold his own. I said at the beginning of all of this that Warhorse set out to create something very specific, but did they deliver on those promises? Obviously they did in fact create a medieval sandbox free from magic and otherworldly creatures. Their combat system, while a bit flawed, does require a discernible amount of skill and practice to perfect. You do have to eat, sleep, and manage inventory, though like I said, a lot of perks just eliminate those needs in the same capacity as they were at the start. You could create your own potions and cook food on a fire, but there was definitely a lack of weapon creation. The most that you could do in that realm was sharpen your already made weapons. Which, while that is cool, I would have loved to have been able to really put the idea of being a blacksmith's son to work, and focused on honing my craftsmanship throughout the game. That desire also extends to food, which really only amounts to throwing things on a fire or dropping them into a stew pot. The idea that you could create a playstyle and build your character around it is definitely there, though that master of one idea is really only part of the game for the first 25 to 50% of it. There are really only 2 or so solid playstyles in all of this. One where you run a melee build, or one where you're sneakier and maybe integrate a bow into your playstyle. Being someone who could talk eloquently doesn't conflict with either of these, and you're not going to have to take away from practicing your stealth or melee to raise your speech. As time goes on, you'll be able to do it all after getting to a comfortable place with one of the other 2 main playstyles. And I'm not opposed to this concept, but insisting that there's going to be a litany of different ways to build your character is stretching the truth. I would have liked to see further expansion on skill sets to become more specialized than they were. Being able to master dual weaponry in exchange for being weaker with two-handers, or being able to spec into using any shield as an offhand weapon, or just having more weapon trees like polearms, flails, daggers, and so on would have went a long way to really making the whole system shine. I understand that a lot of this probably came down to what the studio could realistically do with its time and budget, but looking at my final skill set and going, I can do pretty much everything, doesn't really make this whole endeavor stand out from other games in the space. Kingdom Come Deliverance is one of the few modern RPGs that I've really gotten attached to in a way that I didn't expect, even with its shortcomings. It has a remarkable amount of character and really fun moments baked into nearly every quest. I haven't quite felt this immersed and relaxed while roaming around and plotting my next move in a long while. It's a totally different beast from a game like Oblivion, but that core aspect of feeling like you're part of the world is shared between the two. It's silly to take an effort of this magnitude and state that the game is Oblivion without magic, but the underlying truth to that comparison is the reason that people say it, even if I do disagree. Kingdom Come is Kingdom Come. And what it set out to do and readily accomplished is something that I'm really excited to see developed further in a sequel. Thanks for watching. This one took me a little while, but I really had a lot of fun playing through it again. Thanks again to War Thunder for sponsoring this video, that was mighty cool of them. Feel free to use my link in the description if you want to help support the channel. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do next, but it'll be video game adjacent at the very least. Until then, I've got merch over at my merch shop if you want to support the channel. Some of it is stuff that you wear, some of it is stuff that you stick or drink out of. I've also got a Twitch where I stream nearly every Monday, Tuesday, and Friday. I've got a Twitter where I occasionally type out something before deleting it without tweeting it. I've got a Discord where people chill out and talk about all sorts of shit, probably. And I've got a Patreon. And that's it. Have a good one.